The raspy laughter and the neighing of horses dispersed the silence of the forest. At the moment when she lost her weapon, and the wounds did not allow her to move on, at the very moment when she was captured, and she resigned herself to her fate, the goddess distributed her fate in a different way. The girl was walking through the valiant forest, which was located on the border of the kingdom of Rum. She looked at the mushrooms and said they were so small, but better than nothing. She picked these mushrooms. The girl's name is Lulutina. She heard the screams of the children who were cursing. They were the triplets, Lara, Mana, and Lero. The girl complained so that they would stop swearing. She went on to say that they needed to hurry up and pick the mushrooms before dark. Lulutina called her and said in frustration that there were very few edible mushrooms here. Altina said that the traps were generally empty. Lutina replied that it was bad. There's even less fruit than she expected. She thought fearfully that there would hardly be enough supplies for a month, if only they could hunt. The triplets said at the same time that they wanted to eat. Lulutina leaned over to them and said she was sorry, but the guardian of the forest was watching them. She is sure that next time, he will help them. Lulutina told the girl that they had to leave, otherwise they would not make it before sunset. Lulutina replied that she was right. Unfortunately, it's time for them to leave now. They all went home happily. They heard the sound of hooves. Lulutina screamed in fright. Lulutina shouted loudly to her friends to take the children and run away. Lulutina replied loudly so that she wouldn't even think about it. They will stay with her. The girl said that she would be fine. They will meet by the river. She will get rid of them and come. Lulutina started running away from her friends. She hid behind a tree and began to observe the unexpected guests. The girl thought that she thought so. These people, the knights of the kingdom. She thought angrily that they had found them even in such a remote place. They, the werewolves, had lost this war. People created an illusion of peace for them and poisoned their elders. She continued to reason that her father, their leader, had not backed down and decided to fight to the end. Werewolves were on the verge of extinction. However, they, the daughters of Rain, were not going to put up with this. Lulutina thought that in the turmoil of the battle, they were able to leave and travel far to the west. Finally, they were able to find the forest where their race originated. The knight continued walking further and further away. The commander asked his subordinate what he thought was worth trusting information about demihumans. They told him that was for sure. Those hillbillies said they saw similar creatures here. The man said that they had gone so deep into the forest, if they returned empty-handed, they would feel bad. Lulutina jumped out of her hiding place and cut off the man's head. The soldiers looked at her in shock and shouted that it was an ambush. Lulutina thought that even if it would cost her her life, she will protect her sisters, girls, father, mother, and the gods of the forest. She begs for her blessing. The girls were surrounded by knights. The man tried to hit her, but the girl managed to put out her sword. He said with a grin that it was not the time to look around. Another knight called him George and asked what was the matter with him. He could have grabbed it a long time ago, or maybe he left it for him. George shouted at him to be quiet, and it would be better to help, rather than just stare. Lulutina tried to attack, but she failed. Georg said it gave him goosebumps when she killed the commander, but still, compared to him, she's nothing. He hit her in the stomach, and the girl fell. Lulutina wheezed and dropped her weapon. She screamed in fright that she had lost her knife. The girl tried to get up, but she hurt her leg and couldn't. Jord asked what had happened. Lulutina took out a small knife and shouted for him to step back. She warns him. The man said she was good. Her hair is the color of a raven's feather, and her dark eyes are her type. The knight answered him, which is also their taste. Jorg said they were going to have fun now. Lulutina turned to the gods to help her. Jord told her not to worry. He's her new god now. Everyone left with a loud growl. They looked at the creature in fright. Lulutina joyfully thought that really it was a spirit. Now, they will come back a little bit. The guy opened his eyes and said that he was climbing a mountain. He remembered he had slipped and fallen. He needs to find out where he is now. The guy examined the territory where he is now. He said that there was only grass around, and where there was snow. After all, he was in Okuha, where the record temperature is now below 0. Just don't tell him that while he was lying awake, spring had come. He scratched his head and realized that something was wrong. He looked at his hands, but instead he saw the paws of a bear. He shouted in shock that he had become a bear. What had happened in the first place? He went to the lake and looked into the water. He said he was a polar bear. He was reborn as a polar bear. His stomach rumbled with hunger. It was time to find food. The bear stood on two paws and said that, okay, he needed to get ready. If he fell from such a height, he could hardly survive, which means it's time to start living like a brutal bear. He stood in the middle of the river and began to beat the water with his paws. The bear thought, disappointed, that he couldn't catch a fish. He noticed a fish out of the corner of his eye and hit the water, but nothing happened. He thought, frustrated, that maybe he was the only person in the whole world who didn't have the talents a bear needed. The bear noticed the stone and threw it into the water, shouting what if he did so. The dead fish surfaced. The bear happily shouted that he had done it, and how did they like his shock therapy? They'll call him lunch. He thought that acting like a bear was not an option. He put all the fish on a rock. The bear said that he had caught them, but how to eat them now? There are probably parasites in the river fish, and he doesn't even have a lighter, so what should he do now? He said fearfully that he just didn't want to be told that he would have to eat raw. He turned his head and happily thought that he could smell something, some familiar scent. He stood behind a tree and thought joyfully that there were people there. They're kind of weird. The girl is fighting with several men. If he heard everything correctly, then this poor, sweet girl is from some kind of werewolves. The bear continued to argue that he was a stupid bumpkin, obviously from the army. After all, this is the first time he sees people fighting to the death. No matter what he looks like, these guys are a few times more dangerous. But there are so many people against one girl. He decided he had to help her. He jumped out of the woods and roared loudly. The knight shouted loudly that it was a monster, a white devil. The bear thought that he was really asking them to just get scared and run away. George shouted to the knights not to run away. It's just a bear. They'll just take him down. The bear thought, startled, that he had just proposed to them. The knights ran at the bear. He thought, that's not it. If they stuck spears into him, then he would definitely die. The bear began to push the knights away from him. The bear thought that he would just make his way forward because he was capable of something, so he had to try a little more. He exhaled wearily and thought that there was finally a lull. Ludutina approached him and said that he was a spirit who was the guardian of the forest. She fell into his arms. The bear looked at her face and said that there didn't seem to be any serious wounds. He looked around and saw a whole field of defeated knights. The bear wondered what kind of massacre it was. He just trusted his gut and fought his way through people. But now he looks like an incomparable fighter. He continued to reason that he was certainly not some kind of warrior. He was just destroying everything around him. It's hard for him to even believe it. So his soul is completely connected to this body. The bear asked what was on the girl's head. He touched her ears and she began to breathe loudly. The bear thought that a 28-year-old man was harassing a young girl. It was harassment. He said that okay, the first thing to do was get out of here. Even if the soldiers come here again, they won't find her. The bear put her on the grass under a tree. The bear said he was saying goodbye to the girl with the dog ears. She must grow up strong. He came up through the woods. The bear thought that he hadn't received any information. He continued to speculate that maybe those guys had something useful. After he ate the dried meat and liver, he will be able to make a fire and cook fish. The bear joyfully shouted that it was so delicious it would be like a rhinestone. He lay down in a clearing and said that it was a blessing, but it was time for him to go hunting again to find food. He thought that it seemed to him that life in the forest was getting better, and as soon as he thought about it, he immediately realized that he was unlikely to make friends with other bears. He met a drilling bear who was not very friendly. The white bear looked at him and waved its paw. He asked, startled, how it was. The brown bear growled ferociously. The polar bear thought, startled, that this was what a real bear he was. They started fighting with each other. The polar bear hit his enemy on the head. The brown bear fell to the ground. The white bear wondered what had just happened. It's very strange, but it looks like he was knocked down. But it happened from one small push. The brown bear abruptly jumps up and runs at another bear. The white bear hit the brown one on the head with all his might. He did not expect this. clutched his head and growled loudly. He ran away from the bear in fright. The polar bear thought that he had just run away. He sat down on the grass and exhaled wearily. The bear thought that he really wanted to meet someone. But it's not like that. He looked up at the sky and thought joyfully that it hadn't turned out well. For no reason. For nothing. Their foreheads collided. Maybe it was his territory and all that. The bear fell on the grass and thought that he would no longer appear here so as not to disturb Mr. Bear. He rested for a while and set off on his way. He was walking through the forest and thought he wanted to see the mountains. It was because of that unexpected fight. The bear came out into the clearing. He said admiringly that it was such a nice place. He sat down on a fallen tree and said that the breeze was blowing right in his face. Lulutina came up to him and asked that he was a god. The bear turned his head and saw the girl and her sisters. The bear said it was her. The werewolves fell to the ground and started bowing to him. Lulutina said that he had saved their lives yesterday, but they had not thanked him. This offense is worthy of death. She went on to say that if it suited him, she could offer herself as a sacrifice. So she begs him to protect her sisters by using his powers to guard them. The bear was shocked to think that she was talking at all. They shouted at the same time that they were asking for him very much. He asked what seemed to be a mistake. He went on to say that he's just a happy polar bear, and he's not at all the great guard they're talking about. Lulutina asked that he was not a god. The girl asked where her manners were. She's Lulutina, a werewolf. The bear replied that he had a banal name, Kumakichi. The girl said that he was Kumakichi. It may be strange, but this name suits him very well. The bear blushed and said that he would try to help them anyway, although he doesn't understand at all what sorrows have overtaken them. Lulutina happily shouted that he didn't know what was going on. The girl added that she, unworthy, would answer his questions. The bear complained that she was at it again. The werewolves surrounded the bear and looked at it admiringly. Kumakichi said that it was clear, so only they were able to get to the forest. Lulutina said that yesterday they were ready to murder it. If those people had caught them, they would have cut out their tongues first. She went on to say that he showed up and chased them away. They were able to breathe easy. This is definitely the work of the ancestral spirits. Lulutina shouted to the girls to thank him quickly. The bear awkwardly said that, come on, they could get up. He's even uncomfortable somehow. Laura stared intently at Kumakichi and happily asked what she could do. Lulutina awkwardly told her that she shouldn't be so impolite. The bear told the girl that, of course, she could do it. Laura jumped on the bear and started shooing on it. Leroux ran up and said he wanted to too. Lana said that she did too. The children clung to the bear from all sides and began to play with it. Lulutina blushed and awkwardly shouted that they were going there too. Lulutina told Kumakichi that she was sorry for that. She shouted at the triplets to get off immediately. The girls screamed that there was no way. Definitely not. Altina went up to the bear and hugged him too. He was surprised by such actions. The bear asked them what they really liked. Lulutina laughed and said with a smile that they were still such children. It started to rain. Lulutina awkwardly said that if he didn't mind, he could move to their hideout. It was far away. One of the triplets asked him if he wanted to stay. They came to the cave. Lulutina said she was asking for forgiveness. They couldn't offer him anything. Kumakichi replied that it was nothing to worry about. He just wanted to see how they lived. The bear thought that they had made a shelter out of a cave. It's dark, damp, and the air is musty. Laura pointed at the bear and pointed to a pile of straw. Kumakichi asked why she was sleeping here. The girl replied that she did. The bear asked uncertainly that she was sleeping well. Lulutina said it was awkward. Lulutina told Lutina that she had meowed that she did not need to bring him here. The girl replied that next time don't meow, but say whatever you want. Altina cringed and said she was cold. Kumakichi told her to come here. The girl hid in his paws and happily said that he was soft. The bear said they needed to move to another place. It would be possible to live here if they had fur like his, but they won't be able to withstand the cold. Lulutina sadly said yes. She had already thought about it. Suddenly, everyone heard the sound of a rumbling stomach. Lulutina blushed and shouted loudly that it wasn't her. Altina blushed and replied that it was her rumbling. She apologizes to Kumakichi. They just haven't had enough food for a long time. Laura said they were all hungry. The bear turned and headed out of the cave. Lulutina asked where he was going. Kumakichi replied that they would solve the problem of provisions first, and then housing. They found a big boar. Altina screamed that he ran over there. Kumakichi punched the animal in the nose and defeated it. Everyone happily ran up to him. Lutina screamed that he had succeeded. The triplet stopped near the boar and started biting it. The girl awkwardly told the bear that they were still too small, but this carcass was huge. The triplets cheered, which was great. Kumakichi thought that 300 kilos wouldn't be too much. Maybe it's better to skin him here and then get him out of here. He mockingly said that he was a bear. He had paws he couldn't carry. The girl easily lifted the carcass. Lulatina said with a smile that it was time to return. Kumakichi awkwardly replied that, of course. He thought that he had forgotten that this was a magical world. They reached the cave and built a large and bright campfire next to it. The bear thought that he had skinned game before. It is necessary to cover the carcass with hot water and pull out the feathers. No, that's not it. You need to use the same method as with deer. First burn the wool. Kumakichi called Lulatina and told him to give her a knife. The girl handed him the weapon and told him to take it properly. The bear thought that it would be necessary to scrape off the remains later. He got rid of the fur completely. The bear thought about what to gut later. The triplets started saying at the same time that it smells delicious. They are very hungry, and their tummies are talking. He thought that the last step was to clean the bones. Kumakichi told the girls that the carcass was ready. They cheered. The bear fried pieces of meat on a rock. The girls began to eat meat quickly. Lulatina said it was delicious. Altina happily said it was delicious. Lulatina screamed that it was delicious. Lulatina screamed that it was delicious. Lulatina looked at the kids and said with a laugh that Lana already had cheeks like a hamster. Kumakichi thought that if the boar had given them so much pleasure, then maybe they should try it themselves. Kumakichi touched the meat with chopsticks and thought that it seemed to be ready, and now you can try it. The bear took a bite of the meat and happily shouted that it was very tasty. They were eating delicious food and fooling around. Night had fallen. They put out the fire and went to sleep in the cave. Kumakichi sat and looked at the moon through the cave entrance. The girls flocked to him from all sides. Kumakichi stroked one of the girls and thought that they had a hard time. Lulatina came up to him and asked why he was awake. The bear said that it was Lulatina. The girl asked if he could fulfill her request. Kumakichi asked what happened. She said she was asking me to teach her how to hunt. She went on to say that she understands that it's not good to ask him for anything else. After all he's done for her, but still. She's really asking for his help again. Kumakichi interrupted her and said that there was an interesting expression in her world. Seek, and you will find it, and you will find it, and it will be opened. Lulatina asked what those words were. The bear said that it meant that even a small effort on her part could make a very big difference to another. So he's just learning to be a polar bear. But he already has the wisdom of a bear. He added that he would help her with whatever she wanted. Lulatina asked that he was an old bear. How old was he then? She blushed and said she was sorry. She asked an awkward question again. Kumakichi replied that not at all. He's 28, so she can consider him her older brother. He's an old enough bear. Lulatina screamed that no. He wasn't old. The girl took him by the paw and said that he had such soft fur, and he was also very beautiful, like pure silver. The bear thought awkwardly that she was paying a compliment. Really, he knew it, but if so, it would be polite to return the compliment. Kumakichi said loudly that Lulatina has a very fluffy tail. He looks really cute. The bear proudly thought that everything had worked out, in his opinion, a good compliment. The girl screamed loudly that she wasn't. Kumakichi looked at her in surprise. Lulatina blushed and asked if he was serious right now. The bear thought it was so cute. He continued to reason that she looked like a beautiful girl now. Lulatina asked that he was white. The bear asked with interest what this meant. The girl replied that it was the kind of people who looked like bears. They speak human speech and walk on two legs. Depending on the region, some of them even hold high positions in the administrative apparatus as human beings. Kumakichi asked that they look like real bears. Then, how to distinguish them? Lulatina replied that it was very simple. The species, which are called animal-like, are very easy to distinguish. The bear spoke clearly, so she wasn't surprised when he spoke in a human voice. Lulatina said that his fur is as white as the first snow, just like in the forest. Kumakichi asked what the legend was. The girl replied that there's a legend about this forest that only her people know. When these cubs drive them to the realm of the dead, a white guard will descend from the sky and destroy all evil on earth. She went on to say that he would create a stronghold of peace and security in the forest for thousands of years. That's why, when she first saw them, she thought that God had come down to them, having seen their efforts. Kumakicha awkwardly said that he didn't look like a god at all. He was just doing what he could. The girl happily said yes. The bear stroked the babies, who were laughing. He said it was time to stop laughing. The bear started singing a lullaby for werewolves. Lulutina called him and said with displeasure that she was no longer a child. Kumakicha said that it was night outside and it was time for the young lady to go to bed. Healthy sleep preserves beauty. The girl smiled and replied that it was fine. Everyone was walking through the forest. Lulutina happily told the bear to come here. If she remembers correctly, they will see them soon. She turned her head towards the cabin and said that it was there. There were small houses, but they looked pretty abandoned. The girl added that these ruins were once used by dwarves. Kumakicha said that although they seem abandoned, they don't look too old either. Lulutina told him to be careful. The bear moved a little to the side to study everything carefully. The girl added that she can't smell the people from these houses. Kumakicha awkwardly thought that they had bad feelings when they smelled the smell. He continued to argue that they were hated and oppressed by people. This is not something he can understand. There are reasons why they approached the human village with these two. Kumakicha thought that this was what he wanted, no matter what. The triplets shouted loudly that they were not. They want him to be fried. Lulutina tried to stop them. She shouted in displeasure that if they continued to act so selfishly, she would not give them the meat that Kumakichi had brought for them. The girls continued to shout that they were hungry. She should roast the meat. Kumakichi awkwardly looked at the deer meat that was hunted after the wild boar. He thought that if the carcass was fried, it would become tough, so it was better to stew it. The bear continued to reason that they really liked the wild boar steak. Lulutina grabbed the children and glared at them to calm them down. Kumakichi was startled to think that Lulutina was so scary. He stammered and asked that they could roast one half and put out the other half. The triplets hugged him tightly and shouted that they loved him. Lulutina said she asked him not to spoil them too much. Kumakichi looked at the girls' sly faces and thought they were fake tears. The girls said they love Kumakichi but hate Lulutina. Lulutina glared at the children and began to pull them off the bear. Lulutina came out saying that she had just finished cooking the fish. She asked what they were doing. Kumakichi took the fish in his paws and said that yes, the salt was added correctly, and the fish was cleanly gutted. So they got dried fish. Lulutina replied that she was glad. The girls began to sort the fish. Kumakichi said he thought it was time for him to go. If a magical guy like him stays here, he'll be in the way. He'll look for another place to stay. Lulutina shouted that they would not think of him that way. They just need to inspire them. Lulutina said with a smile that Kumakichi was very warm. Altina asked that they could sleep together. The triplets tearfully asked where he was going. The bear thought that was why he stayed in the caves of Lulutina for the night. They sat down comfortably so that there was enough room for everyone. Kumakichi asked if Lulutina knew where the carpenter's tools were. The girl replied that they had escaped with only what they had, so such things could only be found in human villages. She added that she was very sorry. Kumakichi said no. He didn't think it was their fault. There are a lot of materials here, and he was just thinking. If only he had the necessary tools. He could have done a lot of things. The bear said they don't have to worry about it. Lulutina sadly looked away. Kumakichi thought that while he was looking at her, he had a plan. He continued to argue that there was no problem for him to endure the winter, but the girls were poorly equipped. They would suffer, so he would give these girls a home. Kumakichi thought that in this case, not to mention living next to them, it is possible to establish a relationship by coming to play and staying the night. It's a no-lose situation. He continued to think that having close friendly relations with beautiful girls, even if he is a polar bear, is really very pleasant. The bear thought that for this, he would need to somehow get some carpenter's tools. If a polar bear asks them, then he will simply become a target for capture. Lulutina said that Kumakichi mentioned it, and she remembered that there were ruins left by dwarves on their way here. Lulutina added that there were things used by people nearby. Kumakichi said he was asking me to tell him more about it. He thought that later, together with Lulutina and Altina, They came to the ruins, which were about 30 miles east of their cave. They walked through the village and stopped in front of one of the houses. Kumakicha said that this building still looks good. He broke the lock and opened the door. He saw the tools and shouted joyfully that it looked like a treasure trove. Everything is here, from axes to saws. There is a mountain of carpentry and even repair tools, as well as spare parts. Lulutina asked what he was doing now. Altina asked if there are tools here that they can use. Lulutina happily asked that there might even be food here. They went inside and looked at the instruments in frustration. Kumakicha thought awkwardly that he knew the girls wouldn't be happy with carpentry tools. He went on to reason that, if it were possible, he would like to find a way to meet his daily needs on an ongoing basis. The bear put the tools in the cart. Kumakicha said that while they had all the necessary things, it was time to return. The girls replied that it was fine. They went back together. The bear thought it was something like stealing, but it was for the sake of his sisters and his happiness. So don't think about it. He raised his muzzle and thought it was a familiar smell. The girl started running away. Lulutina shouted for him to be alert. They saw a group of people with guns. Lulutina shouted that she thought so. They were following them. Kumakicha grabbed her and told her not to take out the blade. People make them worry again. They can transfer their anger to him. To be honest, before he died in the mountains, he was an ordinary Japanese man living in a peaceful world. He can't imagine the resentment they have to hide that their relatives have been destroyed, as if it were normal. But they don't know if they're stalking Lulutina and company here. Even if he was accused of naivety, he wouldn't let them kill each other for irrational reasons. Lulutina called the bear and said that everything was fine. She apologizes for the inconvenience. Kumakicha awkwardly said that yes, when the two of them smile, they look much better. The man said loudly that they were worried for nothing. Shiramadara is just a superstition. He was told that it was just maddening. If you keep thinking that it's scary, then everything you see seems scary. The man looked at the dwarves and said that's why they are considered cowards by the dwarves. He went on to say that it just means it's been an unnecessary worry so far. From now on, they have to consult with them, the young ones. Kumakichi thought that it seemed like they weren't hunting them. It would be troublesome if they collided. Although they have already collected all these treasures, maybe they should give up now. People screamed loudly. The bear looked up and saw a huge monster. He thought, startled, that it might be a snake. The monster started grabbing people and crushing them. Kumakicha told the girls that they had to escape quickly. Before she finds them, they should hurry up and leave this place. He heard people screaming for help. The man shouted at his friend, Ola, to hurry up and run away. O replied that he couldn't. His legs wouldn't move. The snake was already a few centimeters away from the man's face. A bear jumped out and punched the snake in the face. Kumakicha shouted loudly. What if he hears a scream? He can't just be an observer and there's nothing not to do. It's been in his personality since he was a kid. He shouted at the guy to hurry up and run away now. Ol said in shock that the bear was talking. Kumakicha shouted at him to be quiet. He's smarter than the average bear. All started running away, shouting that there was an unusual polar bear. Kumakicha looked at the monster and thought that then it would be an unrestrained duel between the monster and him. The bear hit the snake's underside with its clawed paw. He tore the skin, from which blood flowed. The monster screamed loudly in pain and anger. The snake released its venom. Kumakicha thought it was snake venom. It's so strong that it melts the earth. No matter how strong a polar bear's skin is, it's still dangerous. Altina screamed that this attack was not fair. She ran towards him, but Lulutina grabbed her. She told Altina to believe in him. They should not interfere. Kumakicha dodged the snake's venom. The bear thought he couldn't go on like this. Otherwise, he will lose. He grabbed the spear and thought that the weapon should help. He'll borrow it. Kumakicha threw a spear at the snake, but it managed to dodge. The monster lost sight of the spear, which returned and pierced its neck. The bear thought that now. Kumakicha punched the snake's head and knocked out its teeth. He grabbed the monster by the neck and thought that when the fangs were broken, there was nothing to be afraid of. The bear bit the snake's neck. Blood began to flow rapidly from the snake's neck, and it fell. Kumakicha growled loudly near the monster's body. He turned his head and saw people, as well as Lulutina and Altina. The man said admiringly that this legendary guardian deity of the forest had come to save them. Everyone fell to their knees and began to worship the bear as a deity. Kumakicha wondered what kind of situation was going on right now. No, this might be his chance. The bear told the people to hear him. The evil snake demon was defeated by the divine white protector. He went on to say that they don't have to worry. He doesn't want there to be pointless fights in the forest. If there are other travelers, they come from distant lands. The bear said that they should greet and receive them with friendliness. If they react angrily by gathering troops to attack, it will anger the gods. The man shouted loudly that he did. Sir, he went on to say that he was very grateful to Kumakichi, but there was something they didn't understand. His friend called him Samuel and shouted that he was being very rude right now. The bear said he could go on, he could talk. Samuel said that this land was an incredible monster, but it didn't seem like it was the Shiramadara that attacked the villages around it. Kumakicha thought in surprise, but that's it. Samuel said they couldn't go into the mountains, so they weren't well prepared. His friend interrupted him and said that they didn't have enough money to hire adventurers. Samuel shouted that, if possible, they were asking Kumakicha to take care of Shiramadara. People shouted that they were asking Kumakicha to do it. The bear replied that he would take care of Shiramadara. Samuel shouted joyfully that he was very grateful to him for this. Kumakicha told them to be kind to people fleeing from a difficult situation. He added that the tools that were affected by the snake's venom would be collected by him. So, they should be grateful. The people shouted loudly that, yes, sir. Kumakicha waved goodbye to them, and the people left. The bear thought wearily that he didn't know what kind of shield it was, and it didn't matter. But he managed to act like a worthy god. He went on to say that he hoped this would improve the situation with the Lulatina group. Altina joyfully shouted that he was indeed a legendary guardian god. The girl said that his mercy was enormous, which would not leave inferior beings like these people. She's ashamed of herself. She was in the grip of anger that she had forgotten the rules of werewolves to save the weak. Lulatina began to cry and said that compared to this, the gentleness and bravery of his heart proved that he was a god. The bear thought in shock that they believed it too. They went into the forest with all the tools. Kumakicha thought it took a while to explain to these two. He finally convinced them that it was a misunderstanding. Lulatina looked at Altina, who was sitting in the cart. She said it was disrespectful. The bear laughed and said he didn't mind. Altina shouted joyfully. Lulatina told her not to flatter herself. Kumakicha said that he would like everything to remain the same. He thought that either way it was meant to be. Kumakicha said that, as usual, no way. Lulatina smiled and said that no, he was right. The bear thought uncertainly that he was wondering if the misunderstanding had been resolved. Lulatina said that she understands that this is his temporary appearance in this world. She will not deal with this issue. Kumakicha said that then it was time for them to return home. The girls agreed with him. The bear and all the others went into the forest. Kumakicha was chopping down trees in the forest. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and said that he used to cut down forests with old Mataji. He thinks it will help him this time. The bear took the tree in his paws and thought that at this rate he would quickly finish collecting the logs. Japanese cedar has become almost 4 times stronger. If you use it as a building material, then the building will be more stable and sturdy. Lulatina shouted joyfully that they had succeeded in cutting down the tree. Kumakicha said loudly that it was impressive. The triplets shouted, "Why only the older sisters always work? It's not fair." They won it too. Kumakicha replied that he didn't think they could handle it until they were older. The triplets shouted that they wanted to too. Lulatina angrily shouted at them to stop inconveniencing Mr. Kumakichi. The bear thought to move the harvested trees. Lulatina, and Altina trimmed them. The cheeky triplets are responsible for the twigs. They can be useful later. He continued to reason that at this rate, they would be able to start construction even earlier than he had planned. Evening came, and the bear entered their cave. He saw Lulatina and asked where everyone had gone. The girl replied that her sister and the others had gone to the bathroom. Kumakicha asked if there was a hot spring nearby. He's coming down today too. Lulatina said that he should go too. The bear replied that she was right. He asked what he wanted to do. The girl said that if he didn't mind, she could rub his back. Kumakicha replied that it was possible. He did not mind. He doesn't think that with such a body he can get to the back. The girl blushed and told him not to tease her. The bear looked at her in surprise. Lulatina said that if he wanted, she could spend time with him. Kumakicha wondered if she was okay. He continued to speculate that she was muttering something under her breath in a low voice, but whether it could be harassment. The way he's a bear. He thought that everything would be fine since they were different species. The girls came into the cave. Lulatina happily said that it was a good bath. Why shouldn't Kumakich go into it too? The bear thought that it seemed to him that he should behave carefully towards the young lady. Kumakicha told Lulatina that she could rub his back. Lulatina blushed and screamed loudly. The bear laughingly said that he was just joking. He looked at the girls and thought what a strange atmosphere. Lulatina grabbed Lulatina and led her out of the cave. Kumakicha thought he was wondering if he had said anything strange. He went on to say that he thought they had a father-daughter relationship, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. After a few days, the leaves began to fall off. Altina blushed and asked if he wanted a child with her. Kumakicha wondered what it even meant in this world. Probably to rub her back now. Lulatina looked at the firewood and said that still, what a spectacular view. Kumakicha thought they had overdone it, but the excess wood could be used as firewood. He appreciates everyone's efforts. Lulatina asked what he wanted to do with it. The bear asked what he had not told about his purpose. Kumakicha said he was thinking of using these logs to build a new house for them all. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Lulatina asked what was for them. Lulatina asked that he wants to build it here. The bear shook his head in the affirmative and said that it was true. Lulatina asked that it was not a hole for wild animals, but a proper house for living. Kumakicha replied that it was true. The girls cheered. The bear said that in turn, they should all cooperate. If they try hard, they will be able to build a cozy house much faster. They have to work hard. The girl joyfully shouted that it was good. Kumakicha thought that from that moment on, they, along with Lulatina and the others, began their work with logs. The logs will be processed first. Make a horizontal incision and just apply pressure. If they don't treat them, they'll get termites. After processing, they will cut them to the right size. They won't be able to stack them just on top of each other. Therefore, they will make a notch at both ends of the logs. Thus, 50 logs will be enough for construction. Kumakicha looked up at the sky and thought that the days were getting shorter. Winter was coming. That's why he wants to start with construction. Kumakicha was sitting in the hot springs. He relaxed and said that it was so good. It's a little sad that he's here alone, but when Lulatina and the others take a bath, other animals probably come here. He continued to reason that they wouldn't come close if there was a bear nearby. Since he was a bear, he's not sure if he needs to clean it out. Whether he's a bear at all. Kumakicha thought that wild animals usually use parasites. Usually bears don't have a lot of parasites. But in his case, when he grabbed that deer and its ticks turned on him, they immediately died. The bear continued to reason that he was wondering if his body was producing any toxins. Perhaps this is another gift from the Buddha. It wouldn't be bad, of course. He continued to reason that there were only girls around him. Kumakicha came out of the source. He went towards the cave to dry off from the water on the way. Kumakicha thought that his height was over 290 centimeters. But his little thing, how should I put it correctly, is quite small. But it is still better than a human one. He stopped to look at the starry sky. Kumakicha thought that it seemed to him that his needs might change. Since he was reborn into a bear, that was not the main thing. Kumakicha thought that Lulatina had a great shape. She's a very beautiful girl. He hopes that nothing will happen when the mating season arrives. The bear noticed how bright the star was falling from the sky. It was very beautiful. He thought it was for the best. Even a polar bear can have minor problems like this. The bear returned to the cave. The triplets hugged him and shouted joyfully that he was back. They can sleep together. Kumakicha lay down on the straw and thought that let's sleep together. They're cute, so it can't be helped. Lulatina said with a smile that Mr. Kumakicha was very popular. The triplets started biting the bear in their sleep. He exhaled wearily and thought about what a serene day it was. The group was fighting a monster. The girl was scratched by a monster. Her friend called her Masha and screamed loudly. The girl replied that she was fine. It was just a scratch. She looked at the monster and angrily screamed that it was too strong, they couldn't even deal damage. The monster that resembled a bear growled loudly. Kumakicha walked on the rocks along the river. He found a tree and shouted joyfully that Buna had fallen, so there must be mushrooms there. The bear lifted the log and saw a large number of mushrooms. Kumakicha thought that he often found moisture-loving mushrooms near mountain streams. They go well with meat and cover the taste of umami, so you can just lick your fingers. He continued to reason that, of course, he was already tired of meat. He only ate it after he was reborn. By the way, he went to the forest today just for the mushrooms. Kumakicha happily said that he hoped the girls would be happy. He looked into the basket and said that while he was picking them, he found even more mushrooms. He said wearily that it was time to return. He turned his head sharply and thought it was people, and it also smelled of blood and metal. Knowing their dislike of humans, he imagines what they would be getting into now. Kumakicha thought, startled, that they had suddenly come out of the cave. They needed to check. If everything goes badly and you can't escape, you'll have to fight as soon as he realizes they're enemies. He hid in the bushes and began to watch the people. The guy was shouting to his friend, Roy, that the blood wasn't stopping, but he had to hold on. He begs him not to die. Kumakicha thought he had a serious injury, most likely an artery. It doesn't look like they're after Lulutina. He doesn't understand why they're on guard. The bear turned around with the thought that then he had nothing to do here. Suddenly, he heard a loud scream. People screamed that the monster was following them. That monster again. Kumakicha looked at the monster and thought that it was, without a doubt, the same bear he had fought right after his rebirth. Joseph started running away quickly with his friend. The guy shouted that the bear cub thought they would step on the same rake. He struck the brown bear with his sword and severely wounded it. Joseph shouted happily that it was great. He added with a smile that he would kill him at this rate. The bear stood up as if it had never been injured. The guy screamed in fright what happened. The bear wounded two guys at once with its clawed paw. The monster stood on top of the guy and looked him straight in the eyes. The guy screamed. The brown bear started biting him. Kumakicha thought in shock that it was a nightmare. He was eating people. They shouted at the bear not to touch him. They told him to let go. The man shouted that he was going to kill them all. "We need to get out of here." Joseph replied that he would not run far with the wounded man. The man looked at his friend in fright and shouted that they were out of luck. He stood in front of his friends. Surprised, Joseph asked Gil what he was doing. The man replied that he would detain the bear for a while. She must escape with the swarm into the bushes. The guy ran screaming that he was asking for forgiveness. He stopped in front of the polar bear. Joseph shouted in disbelief that there was another one, not this polar bear. Kumakicha thought that if she had left her wounded comrade, he would not have cared about them. Kumakicha ran past the couple shouting that he would take the bear on himself. They need to run away soon. The guy asked in shock that the bear was talking now. The brown bear stopped eating people and rushed at the polar bear. Kumakicha pushed him, and the brown bear flew into the trees. The polar bear said they could pick up where they left off. Kumakicha thought that this was his second battle with this bear, but then it wasn't a difficult fight. He will finish everything quickly. The brown bear punched him in the face. Kumakicha was surprised to think that it was really a blow, so it means he is serious now. The brown bear rose to its paws and began to advance on the white one. He began to strike quickly. Kumakicha thought he was faster than he thought. The white bear began to deflect the blows to protect itself from the fast blows. Kumakicha thought that these were strong blows. They're more painful than last time. He has to restrain them. The brown bear glared at the white bear. Kumakicha thought he must have opened up. He caught the moment and happily thought that he had to go there. The brown bear hit Kumakicha, but he managed to get around him and get behind him. Kumakicha said angrily that the brown bear had now opened. He hit him with all his might. Brown growled loudly in pain. He didn't expect to get hit now. The white man noticed that the brown man had been shot in the eye. Kumakicha thought that his right eye was scarred. It looks like he can't see well. The white bear started moving quickly. He thought that then he should continue to stay in the blind spot. Kumakicha grabbed a brown bear and climbed on its back. The polar bear bit him on the neck with all its might, so as not to snap. Joseph shouted in delight. Gil asked in surprise who this bear was. Kumakicha got off him and mockingly told them to look at him, how angry he was. He needs to watch where he jumps. Kumakicha thought that if he continued like this, then everything would work out. He turned his head and saw a wounded guy who was unconscious. The bear thought that he would lose the chance to escape. Kumakicha continued to reason that if he dodged, the guy would be a corpse. The former bear stared at the guy's calm face for a few seconds. The brown bear started advancing on Kumakicha. The white bear thought so, but what if he didn't dodge? He grabbed the brown one by the paws and shouted that then he would throw him over. A brown bear fell into the trees. Kumakicha shouted joyfully that everything had worked out. The polar bear ran into the forest to find the brown one and continue the fight. Kumakicha couldn't find him anywhere. He thought, startled, that there was a problem. He ran away again. A wounded animal is usually ferocious. There is a possibility that it will go to Lulutina. The bear continued to reason that he should purify himself after this. Joseph and his friends came up to him. He shouted loudly that he was caught. He's not an ordinary teddy bear. The guy asked that he was Ali. He had never seen a white elm before. Kumakicha replied that he did not understand, and did not think that he was elm. He's just a bear who lives happily in the neighborhood. Joseph fell to his knees and shouted joyfully. Thank heaven! He apologizes for thinking such a thing about him. He apologizes again for this, if he offended him. The guy said with a smile that he was grateful to him. He's Joseph, the dark elf. Kumakicha was surprised to think that he was a dark elf. Right, now that he mentions it, he looks like a dark elf. He went on to say that his dark skin and refined facial features made him look like a girl. He probably wouldn't have felt the difference if his voice hadn't been so low. He thought uncertainly that it was definitely a guy, right? Someone said that Shirokuma escaped, yes. They could quickly catch up to him. Kumakicha asked that Shirokuma was that bear. Joseph replied that he did. He saw it in action. This monster is called the giant killer bear. Rumor has it that he kills knights in batches who are trying to purge these lands of evil. Kumakicha awkwardly thought that it was still for him. He said it was good. First, they need to pour out their friend. Joseph shouted happily, which was good, of course. The bear said there was a river nearby. He would take them there to clean his wounds. The guy replied that they were relying on him in this matter. Kumakicha built a bonfire in the forest to warm up the group. The bear asked if that was enough. Joseph happily replied that he did. He can stop carrying firewood. The guy added that he apologizes for the inconvenience. Kumakicha said he didn't mind. He thought that the grass stops the blood growing near villages. The bear continued to reason that she would help stop the bleeding. You can say that first aid should be done by rinsing the plant well, crushing it and spreading it on the damaged part of the body. Kumakicha thought they couldn't save the guy who had his head smashed in. But the other guy was miraculously safe. Unfortunately, the relief did not last long. Kumakicha asked if they didn't need to leave the forest and see a doctor. Joseph replied that he was grateful for his concern, but there was a reason he couldn't leave. The bear asked what the reason was. The guy replied that they were adventurers and had already received an advance from their superiors for this task. If they come back empty-handed, they have to refund the money. The wounded guy said that he was asking for forgiveness. It was all for his sister's sake. Gil said there was no need to apologize. They all agreed to it. It's not his fault. Kumakicha looked at Joseph and said that he seemed to have a reason. The guy replied that he had saved their lives, so he would tell their story. They came to a clearing and hid in the bushes. Joseph asked that Shirokuma was going to show up here. The bear replied that yes, he was sure of it. The bear thought that Joseph and the others came from the Adventurers Guild, from the city of Almgard, which is located far from the forest. They went into the forest to destroy the evil beast, known as Shirokuma. Back in the woods, Joseph said that sometimes they hated each other, but they were always together. They avoided many difficult situations time after time. If there were difficulties, they helped each other. That's what friends mean. He went on to say that Roy was the quietest of them, hiding that his sister was terribly ill. In order to cure her, they had to buy good medicines. Joseph mentioned that medicines cost money. It's something they couldn't afford. Then they saw the assignment. Wild Shuramander appeared out of nowhere in some villages. He said that the reliable border troops in the forts did not even think about helping the villages. Tired of waiting, they collected as much money as they could for completing this task. Joseph said they used the entire deposit carelessly. They have no choice. They can't get the money back. They're just fools who thought it was a simple way out. He added that if they finish the only job halfway through, they won't be able to become adventurers anymore. It's the same as death for them. Like that. Kumakicha thought that after they told their story, he told Joseph not to jump on Shiramadara again, and then offered to get rid of him. The bear thought that in the beginning, in order to do this, he would have to get their permission to do something terrifying. Joseph said that he was asking for Mash's forgiveness, and later, he would give him a decent funeral. Kumakicha told him not to make any noise. They saw a brown bear. Joseph said, startled, that it was just like Kumakicha had said. He came back here. The polar bear told him to be quiet or he would notice. Kumakicha thought it was a terrible thing he was asked to do. It's burying their dead friend, Mash. He continued to speculate that using him as bait for Shiromandara. Shiromandara had to go back for the entrails of Mash, who was fighting him. This is the nature of every bear. Kumakicha thought that the bear would never back down until it tasted its prey. Even during the Senkabetsu incident, in which 7 people died in Hokkaido, the bear continued to devour the remains, until there was nothing left. The bear continued to reason that Brown had returned. They had a plan that would put an end to him. The brown bear started walking towards the body and got trapped. He fell into a hole that was covered with foliage. Joseph shouted loudly that there was fire. Go ahead. Kumakicha threw a bottle of fuel into the pit. The brown bear caught fire. The brown bear growled and jumped out of the pit. Kumakicha told him that he might be suitable now. The brown bear ran at the white one to bite his skin. Kumakicha grabbed him by the neck and said he was grateful that his body was lying during the attack. The brown bear started trying to scratch the polar bear with its claws. Kumakicha shouted that he was not violent. The polar bear thought that he was physically weaker now, so to get rid of it, he must break his spirit. The brown bear growled loudly. Kumakicha shouted that he would not let him go. The bear got up on its paws and started waving its head, but Kumakicha grabbed it tightly. Joseph shouted loudly for him to be careful. He's going to drop it. Kumakicha confidently shouted that he would not let him do it. He bit his ear. The brown bear growled loudly. He couldn't handle his injuries and fell. Kumakicha breathed heavily and said he was tired. A group of joyful adventurers ran up to him. Now Shiramadara is defeated. A few days later, a bear brought crates of food to the cave. Lilatina joyfully shouted that there was butter and cookies. It was so great. Lilatina said that there was also sugar, salt, and clothes, and a supply of medicines. There's even a mirror and vegetables. She asked the bear with interest how he got it. Kumakicha replied that very good people had given them to him. He thought that Joseph and the guys had bought them for him, for the reward of defeating Shiramadara. At first, he wanted to squeeze out the entire reward for him, but he couldn't spend the money in the forest. The bear continued to reason that so. He convinced them that they needed this money for their travels. They decided to give him a few things he needed to live in the forest. Kumakicha thought they were a very passionate, fair, and good-natured group of people. The triplets shouted that there were snacks here, and they loved them. Mealtime. The bear laughed and thought that all babies love sweets. Lilatina took the box away and screamed that she didn't. They all belonged to Kumakicha. They can only eat them on holidays. The triplets started crying, and Lulutana told them not to cry. Altana took the pot and started walking away quickly. Lilatana stopped her and told her to put down a pot of sugar. Altina said that she had also looked for a pot of jam for herself. Lilatina awkwardly screamed that no way. She would never do such a thing. Kumakicha thought that all girls love sweets. The bear told Lilatina that he had met a dark elf from a group of adventurers and had secretly helped them. The girl said worriedly that it was an isolated incident and nothing dangerous could have happened to him. Kumakicha awkwardly said that, no matter how it was. The girl tearfully said that he was a stupid bear. She shouted that today was a special day. Everyone cheered. Lilatina looked at herself in the mirror. Lilatina called her over and told her to help her with something, not to just sit and look in the mirror. Lilatina told her to calm down. She would have to wear something better if she wanted Kumakicha to notice him at all. Lilatina looked at her in shock. Kumakicha looked at the girls and thought that she knows that Lilatina is a mirror only for herself. Lilatina is very obsessed with fashion. One day, she received a cloth that he had purchased from Joseph. She went on to say that after that, she turned into a sewing machine and was very focused on creating new rows. These were not just store-bought outfits, but handmade ones. Kumakicha thought that these outfits would be perfect for going to a wedding. For starters, they're all beautiful girls. Their charm only gets better when they wear more elegant outfits. Lilatina approached him with 2 types of fabric and said that she could not choose between this and that. She asked him what he thought she should choose. Kumakicha awkwardly thought that he was just a polar bear right now. In his previous life, he was single, so it's hard for him to choose something for girls. Lilatina shouted in displeasure that Lilatina shouldn't bother Kumakicha for such trifles. The girl replied that if he wanted beautiful girls to serve him, then it was more profitable for them to be beautifully dressed. Lilatina blushed and asked what to serve him. They started cursing loudly. Kumakicha began to awkwardly leave the cave. He thought he wouldn't stay too long. He came out of the cave and a girl flew into him. Kumakicha said that it was Laro. The girl laughingly said that she wanted to jam. Lara and Lana ran up to him and shouted that they wanted to too. Kumakicha said that he was very glad that they were all happy. He turned his head and said he smelled something sweet and spicy. He saw Altina cooking something. Kumakicha looked into the pot and said that he looked very, very good. The girl said it was stewed meat and fish sauce. She made it herself. Kumakicha thought that she hadn't just warmed up the boar meat stew, but had made it out of it. She's amazing. Actually, it's not difficult at all. She took the time to mix the ingredients and spices. The pot contains carrots, onions, and meat. Very simple ingredients, but very tasty. The bear thought that she also added fish sauce. It can be easily made even from river fish. Wash the fish thoroughly, remove the insides and add salt, and then a sauce forms on the bottom that can be used. He continued to argue that at first there were a lot of fish in the jar, but then it would become too small for the eye, but the proportions would not change. They make full use of the things he got from Joseph. It is important for them to keep them at least 6 months a year. You just have to wait until it's ready. Altina said it was sweet. Kumakicha said loudly that it was time for lunch. The triplets happily shouted that yes, it was time to eat. They were already very hungry. Kumakicha thought. They've been finishing the house for the last couple of days. He was carrying logs, but Lilatina and Altina together could also carry logs. The bear continued to reason that they had hewn the logs and laid them out on 4 sides. Then they started building the walls. He continued to reason that, so the logs that were below, they burned until their surface turned black, so that they would last longer. They had to be charred, otherwise they would have rotted quickly. The bear thought that they had cut several holes for windows and doors. They cut a square in the center for a hidden hearth. Altina took up the task. The girl herself chopped and carved to make everything work. Kumakicha looked at the sky through the logs and thought that if we were talking about the roof, he would like it to tilt only to one side. It's easier to do this and harder to make mistakes. The werewolves helped him make the roof. The girls ran easily and set up the logs so that everything was right. They stood in front of the house. Kumakicha happily thought that the roof was finally finished. They got their own cabin. The sisters looked at the hut admiringly. Lilatina happily asked that this was their home now. Kumakicha said he didn't think it would last long, but they were sleeping here today. The triplets happily ran inside. They were running around the room and shouting that they had a new home. Altina lay down on the floor and watched the children with a smile. Lana shouted that she could sleep. Kumakicha thought that seeing them happy made him glad that he was a man. Lilatina knelt down and put her hands on the floor and said that she smelled fresh wood. Suddenly, the girl started crying. She touched her wet face and asked why she was crying. Lilatina and Kumakicha looked at her with a smile. Lilatina told Kumakicha that she could only express their gratitude for everything he had done for them. They'd been sleeping in the open ever since they lost their parents. The girl went on to say that the day they were ready to become someone else's food, he not only saved their lives, but also saved their souls. He brought them back to life. The werewolves fell to their knees and began to bow to him. They were so happy that their tails were swinging in different directions. Lilatina shouted that they were very grateful to him for everything he had done for them. Kumakicha looked at them sheepishly. He lifted the girl by her shoulders and said that was enough. They haven't finished with all the work yet. Kumakicha asked with a smile if they would help him further. He stood in front of them and happily told them that this was their home now. Altina got up from the floor and shouted loudly that she was not. Everyone turned around and looked at her in surprise. Why did she do that? Lilatina asked what happened. Altina told Kumakicha that it wasn't just their house. He belongs to them all, just as he belongs to him. The bear let out a tear and thought that Altina was so sincere he couldn't even hold back his tears. Kumakicha stammered that somehow the house wasn't finished yet. He asked that they help him with the house. The girls shouted happily, of course. They lit a fire in the house and hung up a pot. They happily watched the fire that was now burning in their house. The girl said it was so warm. Her sister told her that now the wind won't do cough. Cough, it's so cool. The girl lay down on Lulutina's lap and said that they were not cold now. Lulutina said that yes, it was great. Kumakicha thought that after all they had to finish the exterior of the walls. He thought they had filled the gaps between the logs with frozen clay to avoid wind and insects. They nailed the roof to the walls with bark. Kumakicha thought that they had finally set up a hearth and completed their main task. It takes years for a tree to dry out. Otherwise, it won't be possible to build from it. He continued to argue that since the tree, being cut down, constantly loses moisture, one day the house will warp and it will collapse. In any case, it should be enough to survive the winter. Kumakicha thought that when he sees Lulutina's face, he feels that he did the right thing. The girl poured the stew and handed him a plate, saying that today they had mushroom stew and there were plenty of vegetables. The bear came out of his reverie and said that he was grateful to her for this. Kumakichi ate some stew and said it was delicious. Lulutina smiled at his words. She was glad of his words. Kumakicha said that there are many more here. They can take as many as they want. Lulutina happily said she wanted more. Altina held out a plate and shouted that she wanted more. Altina held out a plate and shouted that she wanted more. Lulutina shouted for her to hold her horses. Kumakicha awkwardly said that the dinner was really good. He thought that everyone wanted more. Everyone had enough. Altina confidently said what it was. She and the triplets ate their food quickly and Lulutina scolded them. Kumakicha and Zero looked at them and laughed. Everyone slept peacefully today. Kumakicha came out of the house in the morning. He got a little flustered and said that the weather was great. Okay, he needed to do this before anyone woke up. He went to the forest to do his chores. Suddenly, Altina appeared behind him. The girl asked with interest where he was going. Kumakicha screamed in fear. He hadn't expected to see her, so he was scared. He told Altina that he wanted to check the trap he had set the other day. The girl excitedly asked that she could go with him. The bear replied that, of course. They walked through the forest together. Kumakicha thought that this girl is more silent compared to her sisters, and she is the most dexterous and skillful of them all. Kumakicha continued to speculate that, one day, she would be able to forage on her own. Although she's only 10 years old now. Although her older sisters look much more mature, Altina's looks are no worse. The bear blushed and awkwardly thought that no. What was he thinking about? The girl looked at him and called out. Kumakicha shouted that it was okay. They had to go on. He went on to say that they would hope that they would come across a good meal. As soon as they crossed the fence, they met small animals that could be eaten. Kumakicha said that these would do for a start. Altina asked if it was okay, that it was weasels and martens. The bear replied that she was talking about the ones they had caught for the first time. Meat from omnivorous animals smells bad. Kumakicha thought that compared to these animals, squirrels that eat only fruits and nuts taste much better. If they didn't have a problem with food, he wouldn't even think about omnivores. He continued to reason that they had put aside their remaining white bones and made a soup with meatballs. Then, on the wave of success, they made bread. He is surprised that they managed to bake something good with randomly made cookies. Kumakicha thought that one way or another, ever since Lulutina learned how to bake bread, she stopped gorging on meat every morning. The bear looked at the girl who was drinking tea. He thought that she looked very elegant when drinking tea. Lulutina is quite different from the others. There has always been a certain aura of grace around her. But he likes Lulutina the glutton more. Kumakicha thought that their precious hut was finally ready, so he'll let himself relax. He let Lulutina take the girls and go mushroom picking without remaining vigilant. Lulutina was sitting on a tree stump, and a bear was standing next to her. The girl said to her, "San is late." Kumakicha agreed. He said he was sure she would be back soon. He's probably walking around somewhere nearby. Lulutina said that it was most likely. Kumakicha thought that, however, time passed, but Lulutina still did not return. Kumakicha and Lulutina were already getting worried. The bear told the girl that he would go look for her. they heard crying. Tearful triplets were running towards them. Kumakicha worriedly asked them what had happened. The girls couldn't speak. They were already choking on their tears. Kumakicha asked again what happened to Lulatina. The triplets screamed that bad people had taken her away. In the wild, Boar Fort, a knight entered the room and told Hadwin, his master, that they had captured a werewolf girl. The man shouted joyfully that it was wonderful. Hadwin is the commander. He was hugging 2 girls. The man mentioned that the infamous werewolf girl was here now. She must be alive. He's sure she's good. The knight replied that he would search her and bring her immediately. Hadwin said that he would leave the main course for later. He looked at the girls and said that he would be with them for now. He hopes that they are all grateful to him for bringing them here from the villages. Hadwin told the girl that he could promise her a life without worries, as long as she gives him the respect and obedience he deserves. He could do a few favors for her family. The girl incredulously asked that it was true. Hadwin replied that of course. He thought with a laugh that it would only be in her dreams. The stupid peasants. He would sell her to a slaver as soon as he got bored with her. He would do the same to that werewolf girl. Lulutina was in the dungeon. She was beaten by 2 men. One of them told her to finally give up. He punched her and said with a smile that usually even an adult man screamed at least once after such pain. He asked that the chief's daughter was well made. Lulutina showed her fangs and growled. The man laughingly said that he was so scared. Another man told his friend that she was cute. The man shouted that the boss said they couldn't touch her like that. They should beat her up and make sure she's hurt, nothing more. He has to do something else, or else who knows what kind of punishment this Hadwin will give him. The man said that Commander Hadwin was doing this with the abducted girls. He is sure that he will leave it for tomorrow. Lulutina screamed at him not to dare touch her, otherwise he would regret it. The man picked up the crowbar and said that she was in the dungeon of the fort. She can scream and cry as much as she wants. No one will hear her anyway. Although, if she promises to be a good girl, he could put away those scary tools. Lulutina screamed that if her father had been here, he would have dismantled this miserable fortress piece by piece. The man took off his mask and showed a huge number of scars on his face. He said that the werewolf soldiers are strong, he knows. He's too good. She may notice that he has already felt their blows. They fought one-on-one. Of course, the warriors of the werewolf tribe are fierce and brave. The man continued to say that even God would not forgive their sins, no matter how much they prayed. It would be a sin to refuse his request to finish him off. But no, they left him like this. He approached Lulutina and asked if she understood what he was talking about. She can be a respected warrior, but only until the end of the war. The man asked what would happen when she returned home from the battle. He said that his wife immediately left him for his subordinate and took the child with her. She did it in front of everyone and said he was a terrible monster. The man said he didn't ask to hunt demihumans. He was just playing the role of a humble believer. His friend shouted angrily that it was enough. Lulutina looked down at the floor and thought that this man looked like her, the same victim of the war. The man hysterically shouted that he knew it was a look. It was pity. Lulutina screamed that, no, he wanted to do it. The man said it was great. Okay, but he's already decided. He would torture every cell of her body. He went on to say that by the time the sun rose, she wouldn't be able to think of anything but him. He would put the meaning of true pain in her very being. The man added that they should get ready. No one would be able to stop him when he started. There's no way he's going to stop. His friend put a hand on his shoulder. He screamed at Zack to stop it. They have orders to force this girl to confess where the rest of her family members are, but so as not to break her. Don't do anything to spoil the boss's mood. He asked if Zack had any idea what kind of punishment he would give them, if he was even listening to him. Zack hit his friend with a crowbar and screamed at him to shut up. He shouted at him not to tell him what to do. His wounds are screaming. He wants to take revenge on the demihumans. Suddenly, the walls began to shake. Shocked, Zack asked what was going on there. Some time ago, the knights were guarding the entrance to the fortress. The guy said he didn't think demihumans were so beautiful. He is sure that the boss has already invited her to his place. His friend said he was so jealous of Hadwin. He asked that there were no more demihumans there. If they caught them, he was sure they could get at least one for them. The knight replied that it sounded great. By the way, we haven't heard from Shiromidara lately. Maybe they should go in search of him." His friend laughed and told him to stop. The guy said he wouldn't want to walk in the woods in such darkness. He was told that it was so. The knight noticed that the leaves were moving. The guy looked at his scared friend and asked what happened. The knight said he thought he had heard something. Kumakicha ran out of the bushes and ran at the knights. The guy shouted what it was. His friend shouted that it was a polar bear. Kumakicha led them astray and knocked down the door to the fortress. He stood on his paws in front of the knights. The bear shouted for the kidnappers to listen carefully. To kidnap a beautiful maiden is the most heinous and cowardly act. He continued shouting that Kumakicha had come to bring down the justice of heaven on them. One of the knights shouted angrily that he didn't know that this was a wild boar fort ruled by Lord Hadwin. Kumakicha shouted that he understood this perfectly well. The knights shouted that there was an ambush. They were attacked. Joseph came out of Kumakicha's back and started shooting arrows at the knights. Joseph loudly asked that they had just been taken off the quest. At least he had some kind of plan. Kumakicha shouted that he was not. He'll just send everyone flying in his path. The bear told Joseph that he was grateful to him for showing the way. He doesn't need to do anything else. He doesn't want to get caught either. The guy shot at the soldier. Joseph shouted that he would rather stay. They owe him their lives. His girlfriend is like a sister to them. They can't leave her. He doesn't care that Hadwin, a man, is some kind of Margrave. He's just a tyrant. He added that the time has come to make the world a little better. Kumakicha shielded the guy from the blow with his paw, but the sword did not cut him. The knight asked in shock why his sword wasn't piercing him. Kumakicha shouted that his puny sword couldn't hurt him. The knight shouted for them to surround him. The bear kicked him, and he fell to the ground. More knights ran at him, shouting that he would not pass. Kumakicha grabbed the knight by the leg and used it to throw the other knights away from him. One of the soldiers stopped and shouted in surprise what he was doing. The chief shouted at him not to break formation. He's very fast. Kumakicha scratched him to get through. The knight went to Lord Hadwin and told him to let him report. Having asked what the fuss was about, something had happened. The knight shouted that he was an uninvited guest. They've broken through the gate and are already fighting in the courtyard. Joseph asked in shock how it happened. They just have to kill them, and that's it. They must not be allowed to enter this room. They heard someone shouting for Lotina. The knight shouted that they were already here. Kumakicha kicked down the door and went inside. They tried to hit him with an iron ball, but he managed to quickly dodge the blow. A knight came out and shouted where he was going. This fort is under the protection of the noble knights of Robles. The bear told them not to think that heaven would forgive their sins for what they had done. The knight shouted angrily that there was some kind of heaven. The bear shouted that they should stop talking already. They must return Lulatina to him. The knight said with a laugh that he was Elm. The knight continued to say that these nasty creatures stick together. If he wants to get his girlfriend back, he has to defeat him. Lord Hadwin's right-hand man, Alphonse Shooting Star. He threw an iron ball at the bear. Joseph shouted at him to be careful. Kumakicha covered his face with his hands to ward off the attack from Alphonse. Kumakicha thought it hurt, but he had to endure it. Lulatina must have gone through much worse since she was captured. The bear growled furiously. He ran at Alphonse and punched him in the face. The man was completely defeated by Kumakichi. The polar bear opened the door and shouted that Lulatina was here. He saw the girls who screamed in embarrassment. Joseph pointed his finger at the man and shouted that it was their boss, Hadwin. The man was hiding behind the girls. Hadwin shouted in fright who he was. He's the Margrave's son, Hadwin. He understands that. Joseph fired an arrow that hit the wall next to Hadwin's head. The guy shouted that he knew that Hadwin had committed a bunch of disgusting acts, hiding behind his position. His death will fulfill the wishes of several dozen nearby villages. Hadwin handed the chest to the bear and said that here, he can take all the girls and all the money. In exchange for keeping him alive, it sounds tempting. Hadwin asked that he was Elm. Wasn't he? He was asking for him very much. He's too young to die. Jose sighed indignantly and shouted that after all his selfish poking, he would beg for mercy when his time came. Joseph told the bear that he might not even get his paw dirty with this maggot. He will put an end to it. Kumakicha shouted for him to wait. He grabbed Hadwin. Kumakicha said that if he is the commander of this fort, then you should tell him where they hid the girl who was abducted around noon today. He should tell him about it immediately. Hadwin shouted in fright that he would tell him everything. That dark-haired girl in the dungeon, he told him what he wanted, then he would have to spare him. Kamakicha replied that of course, but only his life. He scratched the man's face badly. He and Joseph left the room and went in search of Lulutina. Joseph said with a smile that they needed to find his girlfriend faster. Kumakicha stopped and said that he should take the other abducted girls and help them escape first. Joseph said worriedly that he would be alone then. Kumakicha confidently replied that he could handle it on his own. He could not worry, but fulfill his assignment. The bear continued to say that if they left these girls alone, who knows what the other soldiers would do to them. He's the only one who can protect them. Joseph sighed and said that if he said that, then he couldn't refuse. Kumakicha said that he was grateful for his help, but it was time for him to go after Lulutina. Joseph shouted that when it was all over, the drinks were on him. Kumakicha waved at him that everything would be fine. His main task now is to save Lulutina. The bear walked through the corridors of the fortress. He thought he could smell burning, that someone had started a fire somewhere. Kumakicha started shouting Lulutina's name loudly so that she would respond. Kumakicha sniffed and shouted joyfully that he knew this smell. He ran into the room and found Lulutina in the hands of a crazy guy who already wanted to hurt her. The bear growled furiously and began to approach the guy. He shouted in fright who he was. He's going to get in his way. He gripped the crowbar tighter to defend himself. The guy screamed for this disgusting bear to die. Kumakicha punched him in the face and shouted at him to get out of his way. He destroyed this terrible guy. Kumakicha ran up to Lulutina, who had her eyes closed. He broke the shackles, shouting that he would get her out now. She just has to hold on. The bear hugged her and examined her. He said, startled, that she had so many bruises. He apologizes to her for this. The girl began to come to her senses. Kumakicha excitedly called out to her. The girl began to cry and screamed loudly in fear and relief that it was over. She was so scared that she couldn't move. The bear hugged her and gently told her that everything was fine now. Everything is fine. It's time for them to go home. Kumakicha managed to save Ludini from the hands of terrible people. A few days after the rescue of Lutine, Kumakicha sat on a log and looked up at the sky. A joyful Joseph ran up to him and waved at him. The bear said he was sorry for making him come all the way here. The guy said it was nothing. It was nothing. Collecting information about the fort is a small thing, especially if he asks for it. Kumakicha thought with tears in his eyes that Joseph was such a good guy. The bear asked with interest what he had learned. The guy said that, fearing that the rumors about his defeat would spread. In his report to the macrograph, it was said that the fort had burned down in a fire. Now he is joining the ranks of all comers, preparing for hunting in the mountains. He thought that after he had barely saved his life, he would have ended up with this. But it wouldn't be that simple. The fact that Lulutina was released from his imprisonment is also a big political miscalculation. There are still too many living beastmen from the Lulutina clan who don't care about the Lord's opinion and continue to resist. He's definitely afraid of a hoax. Even if simple rumors start spreading about a powerful entity, maybe even a guardian spirit, and even that he appeared in a forest where werewolves are hiding. Joseph said that Hadwin was keeping his mouth shut anyway, so the Lord's troops weren't doing anything. But he had already gathered several hundred people. Now he would say that there are about 500 of them. The guy continued that this was not the main problem. If his hunt starts, he will summon all the hunters nearby. For a decent fee, they'll find scum who can find their way here. Joseph said that it was not possible to live a few days away from the nearest larger village. Kumakich was asked how long he thought it would take Hadwin to finish his training. The guy mentioned that his wounds are shallow. They can assume that it will take him 7 days to recover. Another 7 days for him to gather all the necessary supplies, for a total of about half a month. Joseph said that if you look at it from the other side, how deep into the forest can they escape in that time? Kumakicha replied that he would not run away from here. The bear said that in half a month he would be able to prepare and carry them out with his feet. He could have handled 500 or 600 soldiers even on his own. Joseph shouted at him not to talk nonsense, no matter what he decided. He would go with him to the end. He has been roaming the forests and mountains for a long time, so a lone dark elf will not burden him. Kumakich said that if he continued to hang around next to him, he himself would be carried out feet first. He should have received enough money from the Adventurers Guild after defeating Kurumadara. The bear added that he didn't need to risk his life for a fool like him. Joseph shouted that he had told him not to talk nonsense. If he was so afraid for his life, he wouldn't have gone to the fort with him to fight in the front ranks. The guy continued to shout that he was attracted to his masculinity. Really, he doesn't understand when such feelings blossom between men. Risking your life is a common thing. Kumakicha looked at the guy with tears in his eyes. The bear awkwardly asked what other feelings were. Such things confused him. If he had told him to stand in front of him and get hit, he would have done it. Joseph shouted that he was his anytime. Kumakicha turned away and said anything but that. The guy with tears in his eyes asked why he was crying. Kumakicha asked that he was crying too. The bear thought that at least Joseph was half human, half dark elf. Apart from these ears, he is identical to a human for him. He continued to reason that in the meantime, he is a 100% pathetic bear covered in fur. He doesn't even know how to use the bear's vocal cords to make sounds and words in human language. Kumakicha thought that this guy believed in him. In front of him is a man who was ready to risk his life for him. He has no words. The bear held out his fist to the guy and said they would do it. The guy punched him with his fist and shouted that it was covered up. Evening came, and the bear returned home. The Latina was cooking dinner for everyone at that time. The triplets were all over Kumakicha. Lulatina said with a smile that she was glad to see him back. Lunch will be ready soon. Lulatina said he was asking for his forgiveness. She hopes it hasn't become a problem. She added that she would take care of everything from tomorrow. Lulatina excitedly asked why she didn't leave some housework to them. She and Altina learned to cook from their mother. Altina agreed. The girl said she could leave it to them and rest. Altina lay on her back. Lulatina shouted that she shouldn't push him. She's not sick. She's fine. She was surrounded by triplets with a blanket. They shouted for the little sister to stay down. They'll do the cleaning. Lulatina shouted in shock that they were two. The triplets wrapped her in a blanket and laughed happily. Lulatina screamed that she would just stay here and be silent. Altina said that Lulatina is in her role. Kumakicha thought that Lulatina was trying to pretend that she was holding on, so her sisters weren't too worried about her. No doubt she feels responsible for protecting her sisters instead of her father. Altina anxiously called Kumakicha. The bear awkwardly replied that it was nothing. He was just hungry. Lulatina said she was sorry, and it would be ready soon. Lulatina filled the plate and shouted for them to fly in. They can eat to their heart's content. The triplets happily shouted that it smells so delicious. They want to eat so much. Kumakicha thought to help him and Lulatina recover. Today's menu consists entirely of fried food. Lulatina said with a smile that she could cook more, so they can eat to their heart's content. The bear sniffed the food and happily said that let's get started. He tasted it and said it was delicious. The bear thought the crispy breadcrumbs and juicy meat go perfectly together. He could eat it all day. Lulatina told her sister that it was very tasty. Lulatina has surpassed herself. Lulatina said with a smile that she was glad to hear that. After a cozy dinner, there's something all werewolves should do. The girls screamed that, of course. Kumakicha thought that after a cozy dinner, there was something that all werewolves were required to do. It's brushing your teeth. Lara sat on the bear and said with a smile that she would brush his teeth. Kumakicha thought that teeth were very important for werewolves. They make toothbrushes out of sterile twigs and brush their teeth thoroughly, almost making it addictive. He went on to say that he also started brushing his teeth after the girls told him about it. Dental problems are always so painful. With a smile, Laro told him to open his mouth wide. Kumakicha did not dare to open his mouth. He thought he knew Laro was trying to be caring. He really shouldn't let her run that stick in his mouth. Rio continued to reason that he wasn't a fan of this. It's like a role-playing game. A mother takes care of her child. He's not a fan of that at all. Lulatina said with displeasure that Lara was inconveniencing Kumakicha. Little Tina asked how she could focus on brushing her teeth. Laro hugged the bear tightly and mockingly asked that her little sister was jealous. Laro asked that she knows that Kumakicha is marrying Laro. Lulatina screamed in shock. Lulatina shouted in displeasure that it was pointless. Altina said that not in this life. Kumakicha awkwardly thought about what was happening now. Laro screamed that there was no way. Kumakicha's fangs belonged to her. She put the brush in his mouth and told him to say, "Ah." Laro happily asked that it was nice. Kumakicha thought wearily that it was so wet and sticky. He looked at the older sisters and thought, startled, that these stairs were frightening. We just have to wait out the storm. Night fell, and Kumakicha went outside. He looked up at the beautiful night sky. Suddenly, he heard Lulutina scream. The bear asked what happened, why she was in such a hurry. Lulutina awkwardly replied that Kumakicha was not himself today. The bear said she could see right through him. The girl said with a smile that he was more predictable than he seemed. Lulutina continued to say that his face said that he was thinking hard. Kumakicha replied wearily that she was right. People gather in their forest. The bear looked at the girl and thought that they were proud of who they were. They wouldn't run away even if she asked them to. He doesn't want them to be in pain again. Lulutina said with a smile that it was happening again. He stops talking and mumbles something. She always wanted to ask him something. The girl asked why he was going so far for them. Kumakicha thought because at first he just wanted to help, to give a helping hand to girls in need. Then spending time with them became a habit. The bear thought no, it was just an excuse. He was reborn as a polar bear. He was very lonely in the forest. If he had been left alone, he would have lost all humanity. Kumakicha went on to argue that the fact that Lulutina and the girls needed him made it clear to him that he was Kumakicha's Kumata and not just a beast. The bear told the girl because he needs her, that's all. Lulutina smiled broadly and happily said that it meant that he had already become part of the family. Kumakicha awkwardly looked at the girl, who laughed out loud. Suddenly, the door of the house opened and all the girls ran out. The triplets and Altina hugged the bear tightly. Kumakicha wanted to tell them something, but Lulutina confidently told him not to tell them to run. They will fight. Lulutina said with a smile that she would definitely help in any way she could. Altina said they were fighting together. Defeat is unacceptable. The triplets shouted that they would not lose. They will fight too. They'll show them. Lulutina asked him if he was feeling better now. Kumakicha replied that he was, as if he had 1,000,000 soldiers behind him. They will fight, and they will definitely win the battle. Hadwin threw the glass at the wall. He touched the bandage on his face and screamed that he was in so much pain that he couldn't sleep. Why did this happen to him? He said angrily that this terrible polar bear wouldn't leave his head. He won't just kill him, no. He will quarter him, and then show his corpse to the people. A knight ran into the room. Hadwin shouted angrily that he had told no one to enter. The guy excitedly said yes, but the situation was different. Outside the door, the man said he was coming in. Hadwin furiously shouted that he said no one should enter. A huge bear entered the room and growled. Hadwin closed his eyes and shouted loudly at him not to eat it. He realized that nothing had happened and opened his eyes, but there was no bear. Hadwin asked in surprise that he hadn't been eaten. The man laughingly said that he had no desire to swallow such a pig. Hadwin shouted in shock that it was him. The man smiled broadly and said that he was Sir Guillaume at his service. He came to help him in the fight with the bear. The knight was running through the forest. He yells that he has never heard of such a thing. They didn't warn them about this. This is not an ordinary hunt. The guy tripped over the rope. He fell to the ground and screamed that it was a trap. He's in so much pain, what's the trap doing here? A polar bear approached him. The knight screamed at him to get away from him. The guy looked at the bear and shouted what kind of monster it was. Kumakicha thought that it had been 2 weeks since they had rescued Lulutina. Hadwin soldiers formed a beast-conquering squad and headed for the forest. Kumakicha asked Joseph what was going on there. The guy replied with a smile that everything was fine. They think it's just hunting an animal, so they don't suspect anything. He went on to say that it would be fun when they were trapped. Joseph asked about the situation here. Kumakicha replied that everything was quiet, naturally. The bear thought that they might seem insignificant compared to Hadwin's army, but they were well prepared for battle. Joseph oversaw all the preparations at the castle. He continued to reason that while Lulutina and the girls were preparing traps, Joseph asked with interest what the girls were doing now. Kumakicha replied that they were waiting in the forest. He hopes they'll be okay. Joseph said that when the battle was over, he would like to see Lulutina. After all, he hadn't given her his due respect yet. Kumakicha replied that he did. She has beautiful black eyes and fur. Joseph laughed. Kumakicha awkwardly asked what it was. He's very surprised. The guy said he didn't know everything about his tribe. But his fiancée must have beautiful fur. Kumakicha thought that Joseph seemed to have the wrong idea about Lulatina, although that wasn't the point. The bear said they should strike while they were unguarded. Their main target is a local hunter. Joseph said yes, but he doesn't know what scared Hadwin so much, but he uses all his strength to catch and kill him. Kumakicha asked if he could set fire to the forest to smoke them out. Joseph said with a smile that no, there was no need to worry. If the flames get out of control, then not only the forest and the mountain, but also other territories, including Hadwin's lands, will be destroyed. Then he will definitely not escape the chopping block. Joseph added that this is why the soldiers have dispersed and are gradually encircling the area. Kumakicha replied that he understood. They heard the trap go off. The bear screamed that they were here. He and Joseph should go now. The guy shouted that it was okay. The knight said with displeasure that it was foggy here and the road had ended. His friend replied that yes. The knight said that using so many soldiers to hunt a single beast was the only thing Mr. Hadwin could think of. He was told that Dora would be more comfortable. He just had to be patient a little. Kumakicha appeared and hit him on the head. He began to deal with the knights quickly. The commander shouted in fright that the enemy was attacking. Joseph fired an arrow and pierced the commander's neck. The archers lined up to attack the bear. The knight shouted that there was fire. Kumakicha, deflect the arrows with your skin. He complained that it hurt. He started running into the depths of the forest to hide. The knight ran after him, shouting that the beast was trying to escape. They had to run after him. Kumakicha stopped and noticed that they were watching him. He started running from side to side. Laughing, the knight shouted for them to just look. The beast can't handle their soldiers. First and second, he orders them to draw their spears. Kumakicha thought they were fools. It wouldn't even occur to them that he did it on purpose. The soldiers ran towards him, when suddenly they stepped on a pit and fell. Most of the soldiers fell into the pit, which was filled with sharp spikes. Their commander said in shock that it was a trap. He shouted for everyone to stop. He said that the mere thought that an animal could have built a trap was simply amazing. The man raised his head, but did not see the bear. He shouted in shock that he had disappeared. Kumakicha walked around him from behind and pushed him into the pit. So they repelled another offensive. Bear and Joseph met again to discuss the situation. The guy said that Kumakicha did a great job. He dealt with them easily. However, he thinks they should be more careful. Kumakicha asked why. Joseph replied that Hadwin had a platoon of magicians in his army. He's really desperate. The bear said in surprise that he was eating magi. Despite his strength, they can injure him if they use some unknown magic. Joseph awkwardly said no. The rank isn't that high for that. These guys are only good at water magic. They shoot water arrows or freeze their enemies. Anyway, forewarned means armed. Kumakicha said that he could handle them. The guy said he heard Hadwin hired a terrible man, Margrave Coldrisha, General Veltin, and his division. Joseph went on to say that they had fought not far from here with a man named Guillaume, who possessed remarkable strength, and now he was helping Hadwin. He said he wasn't a tactical genius, but he was strong. Rumor has it that he has the blood of the Leos tribe in him. Kumakicha thought that Guillaume, if this is true, then he shouldn't underestimate him. The bear asked what kind of tribe the Leos were. Joseph said that maybe he hadn't heard of them. They are half-humans, descendants of lions. They have lion faces, and the power is comparable to that of an orc. They are incredibly strong. The guy went on to say that they were from the southern lands, so they didn't seem to like the cold. Kumakicha replied that it was clear. If there are half-human polar bears, then the existence of half-human lions is quite logical. Kumakicha said that even so, Joseph is so wise. The guy asked in shock that he was wise. The bear replied that it was. He doesn't know much, so the fact that he's with him is very encouraging. Joseph confusedly said that this was not the case. He's very ignorant, to be honest. It's just that he knows something here, something there. This is unworthy of praise. The guy started walking away. Kumakicha asked where he was going now. The guy shouted that he would go on patrol. The bear waved at him and wished him luck. Josiah was running through the woods. He said that just a little more and he wouldn't have been able to hold back with Sire. He said that Joseph is wise. The guy heard the scream and hid in a tree. He asked with interest what it was. Was it really a dispute? The knight shouted that all the local hunters had disappeared and that the beast was nowhere to be seen, but he could handle it. They shouted at him to stop. Guillaume grabbed him by the head and asked him where he was going to go. The man laughingly said that he was leaving after paying. He was definitely a mercenary. The knight shouted in fright for him to let him go. Guillaume squeezed his head and crushed it. Joseph whispered in shock that he was Guillaume. The men smiled evilly. Guillemot said that the mouse had shown its nose out of the hole. Joseph asked, startled, that he had noticed him. The man told the knight to give him his spear. Guillemot grabbed a spear and threw it at Joseph. The guy started to run away when he suddenly saw a spear right in front of his face. He sighed in fright, and the birds flew up into the air in fright. Guillemot came to the place where Joseph was. He saw the spear that pierced the cape. He complained that he had missed. I got a quick mouse. Guillaume raised his spear, which began to drip blood. He smiled and said that, although no, he didn't miss, so he did well with this mouse. Joseph came to the bear saying that he had made a mistake. Kumakicha looked at the guy who was pinching the wound on his shoulders. The bear screamed in fright. What's wrong with him? Kumakicha bandaged the wound with a bandage and said he hoped it could be considered first aid. Joseph said wearily that he was grateful to him. With that, he can continue fighting. The bear sternly replied that it was not. He needs to go down the mountain and find someone who can provide him with real medical care. Joseph asked in surprise what. The guy got up from the rock and shouted that it didn't hurt anymore. His arm is fine. He can still hold a sword. Joseph breathed heavily and dropped to one knee. Kumakicha helped him to keep his balance and asked him what he was seeing. There's not much he can do in this state. The guy said with displeasure that he could object. The bear told Joseph that he didn't want him to suffer so much because of him. They still have an advantage and a bunch of traps to boot, so he has to remember, they will win. Kumakicha said that if more troops were sent after him, after Harwen's soldiers were destroyed, he would be the only one he could count on. Joseph began to cry and said that he thought he would regret that he had decided to accept his help. Kumakicha replied that he was not at all. Now the main thing for him is to recover as soon as possible. The bear added that he must survive and come to his aid again. After a long time, Kumakicha went home to check on his sisters. Lulutina happily shouted that he was fine. The triplets ran up to the bear and hugged him tightly. The girl complained, telling the girls not to push. Kumakicha said he was fine. Joseph had to leave them. Lulutina said uncertainly that this was Kumakicha's companion who had helped him in battle if he was not confusing anything. The bear replied that it was. He was seriously injured, and he advised him to retreat. Lulutina confidently shouted that, from now on, they, the werewolves, would fight for the allies who had shed their blood for them. Kumakicha firmly said, yes, they will win. They will show these rags that it was not worth poking into their forest. Everyone shouted loudly that yes, they would protect the forest from enemies. The army was advancing into the depths of the forest. Kumakicha thought that this was how the decisive battle on Mount Kudnik began. Lulutina ran out in front of one group of knights. The guy shouted that the enemy was attacking. The knight shouted at his friends not to rush headlong. There were probably traps. Lulutina took out her sword and thought that it looked like they had become more careful. Kumakicha thought that in that case, he would just distract them. The bear ran out and took down a couple of knights. Those who remained surrounded him and shouted joyfully that he had jumped out of the forest. One of the knights said angrily that he had broken their formation, and now they had to attack. Meanwhile, in the center of the camp, the knight came to Hadwin. The man happily asked his subordinate that the beast was already dead. The knight bowed and replied that not yet, but they were trying. Hadwin shouted angrily that he had just told him. They should have brought his head by now. The knight replied that a group of mercenaries had just engaged them in battle. The guy continued to say that the beast had left the forest, and now they had the advantage. It will only be a matter of time before he dies. Hadwin happily said that he would look forward to it. Hadwin bent down to the knight's face and said with a smile that, by the way, they should try to catch the girls alive. The knight quietly replied that it was fine. Hadwin shouted that he was free then. He proudly walked out of the tent. Hadwin said that he had spent so much effort and resources, but these cuties would be a worthy reward for him. Hadwin noticed Guillaume and angrily shouted that he was a scoundrel. Why wasn't he on the front line? Guillaume glared at him, which made Hadwin sigh loudly in an alarm. Guillaume complained that there was water magic there. He hates it. Hadwin asked angrily what he had just said. He pays him for what? The man replied with a smile that he needed to wait a bit. He added that time was almost up. Hadwin asked what it meant. He began to leave with dissatisfaction, saying that the report of their deaths could come at any moment. He better be ready. Guillemot thought that Hadwin had decided that knowing his enemy meant defeating him. Kumaki fought with a knight. The men tried to stab the bear with swords. Kumakicha said it was useless. He defeated the soldiers one by one. 3 people ran up to him at once and started hitting him with swords. The bear turned around and took them all down at once. The other knights shouted that this terrible beast was still breathing. Kumakicha felt his backache. He thought that, of course, such a blow could hurt, but he would not be able to stop it. The bear noticed the people in robes. They released a stream of water. Kumakicha grabbed the knight and used him as a shield. He thought, that's what magic is. He continued to reason that these scoundrels were dangerous. We need to remove them first. Kumakicha ran at the magicians, sweeping away the knights in his path. Ice got into it. The bear thought it was an ice arrow, but it couldn't take him. Kumakicha destroyed all the magicians. He turned to the knights, who were staring at him in fright. Kumakicha thought that now it was time for the second act. The bear exhaled and screamed with pain in his voice. The knight asked in surprise what was going on. The bear covered his head with his paws and cried. Kumakicha began to quickly withdraw from the battlefield. The knight was shocked to say that really he was running away. He's really running away. He's really running away. The knights ran after him, shouting that the beast was exhausted. They'll kill him and use his skin for rags. He has to stop so they can catch him. Kumakicha climbed over the rocks to the top. The knights shouted that he was climbing a mountain. They had trapped him. They'll cut him into pieces, but they have to catch up. Kumakicha thought it was just in time. He jumped into the bushes and shouted that now. Lulutina shouted that it was okay. She cut the rope, and logs rained down on the knights. Some knights were overwhelmed, while others screamed that they needed to run away. The commander shouted at them not to push. Kumakicha walked around them and jumped out in front of them. The knight asked in shock that he had come down. Kumakicha grabbed a log and thought that now was time to start a real fight. He started hitting the knights with a log. The knight shouted to his friends to raise their shield. Kumakicha picked up a log and shouted that it was useless. The bear hit dozens of knights with a log. The soldier angrily asked why this was happening. His friend replied that the bear was just mocking him. Lulutina and Lilitina shot at the knights from the mountain. They deftly hit them. Someone shouted that they were werewolves. At the same moment, a huge boulder hit the knight. Altina and the triplets launched rocks using a catapult. Lulutina and Lilitina shouted that they would cover Kumakicha's back. It should hit right in the center. The bear thought that if he wanted this to end, he had no choice but to put all his strength into this jerk. Guillemot appeared and shouted joyfully that he was here. He must be that forest beast. They finally met. Hadwin laughed happily at his words. Kumakicha took the log in his hands and followed the man. Guillemot stopped and said that the signs were right. He should be standing here. His name is Guillaume. He's here to kill him. The man angrily added that if he surrendered now, he would give him a painless death. Kumakicha stared into his eyes, showing that he was serious about the battle. The bear smiled and said that, unfortunately, he couldn't just give up his life. Guillemot shouted at him to stop saying all that. He was going to die anyway. The man smiled and said that he understood him. Only a fool would give his life without a fight. Hadwin asked irritably what he was doing. He should just kill him, and quickly. Kumakicha looked at him with displeasure. Hadwin hid behind the knights and shouted in fright for him to stay away from him. He can't go near it. Kumakicha thought that Hadwin was in command of the entire army, but he wasn't really deciding anything here. The real threat here is Guillemot. The man smiled angrily and looked at the bear. Kumakicha was asked why he was working for him. He can't believe that a warrior of his level would bend in front of him. Guillemot replied with displeasure that he did not work for him. The bear asked why then. Guillemot said that he works for this country. Kumakicha said that it means that oppressing demi-humans is what is needed for the well-being of this country. Guillemot said that weakness is only their fault. It should mean that the strong rule this world. Kumakicha looked at him angrily. His gaze conveyed all the hatred for him. The man said that he believed they would not find a common language with him. Guillemot took out his sword and said what he thought. He noticed that he was only half a werewolf. He went on to say that wherever he went, he was always looked at askance, considered a monster, but unlike them, he was strong. He beat out all the nonsense of them all, no matter who spoke in front of him. Guillemot said that was how it was until he met General Welton. He hired him for his monstrous strength. Finally his power was appreciated. The man went on to say that even someone as diehard as him could find a place for himself that he could call a demon. He is deeply indebted to the general for everything he has done for him. Kumakicha said that this was what it meant, as a place that could be called home. He thinks they don't have an election. It's time for them to fight each other. Guillaume smiled broadly. Altina asked in surprise that the soldiers were retreating. The triplets happily asked what happened. They won. The soldiers left. The girl replied that she hadn't yet. The knights approached them. The guys shouted joyfully that they had been found. Throwing stones is not good. The game time is over. He told his friend to look at how many cuties there were. The knight replied that they should go with them. They would not hurt them. They won't scold them. They'll just teach them good things. Altina took out a slingshot and shot the knight in the head. The knight screamed that it hurt so much, why it hurt so much. Altina said that such terrible people should die. The guy ran at the girl, and she shot at him. Altina said she was too slow. The triplets shouted for Oa to look back. Lulatina ran up to him and stabbed her in the neck with her sword to protect her sister. The triplets hugged Lulatina tightly. She asked if they were okay. Altina replied that she did. Lulatina said they should go then. Her sister asked where. Lulatina pointed her finger directly and asked if she saw at least one soldier in the vicinity. Altina said in shock, which means Kumakicha is already there. Lulatina replied that it was true. If they get any closer, at least a little bit. The girls thought that they believed in the victory of their guardian angel. He has to win. Kumakicha looked at Genova's weapons and thought that the other soldiers also had naginets. If this is the case, then jumping madly can be very dangerous. He can chop this log with one blow. Guillemot asked what he was waiting for. They're going to fight or whatever, but okay. Then he'll start. The man ran at the bear to kill it. Kumakicha thought he was fast. The bear deflected the blow with his log. He pushed the man away from him. Guillemot asked with a laugh that he was afraid to come closer. He hit the bear on the head, but he managed to substitute a log. Guillemot broke his log in two, but also injured the bear's stomach. The man looked at Kamakia's wound and thought with a smile that this bear was completely different from those he had fought before. Kumakicha thought that he had cut his log with brute force alone. He is clearly stronger than an ordinary bear. His weapon is longer than the others. If he can't get any closer, then he'll have to cheat. He threw a log at Guillaume's head. The man looked at him in surprise. He hit Kumakicha's muzzle with a non-sharp part of the weapon. The man screamed that he was too weak. Guillemot shouted that his head belonged to him. The girls watched the fight worriedly from their place. The man stabbed the bear with the blade, but it caught it in its teeth. Kumakicha grabbed the weapon with his paw so that it would not be torn from his teeth. Kumakicha thought that he couldn't even move it. Kumakicha clenched his jaw harder and the blade broke. The bear said that now they would fight on equal terms. Guillemot said he was pleasantly surprised. He is no ordinary beast, and now he has to name the warrior of the forest. The bear said that his name was Kumada Kumakicha. Guillemot turned into a lion and said that he promised to carve this name on his tombstone. He got angry, but he still took the form of a human. He jumped on the bear. They started hitting each other blow after blow. Guillemot said with a laugh that it was easier to hit a large carcass. Kumakicha headbutted him in the stomach with all his might. Guillemot hissed in pain and grabbed the bear by the skin. He picked it up and threw it at the soldiers. The knights shouted that they needed to get out of here, or they might get hurt. Kumakicha got up from the ground, and Jimo started hitting him in the face. The bear also started waving its paws to defend itself from the man and defeat him. Guillemot said with a smile that it was slow. Too slow. Kamak tried to block his punches, but it still hurt. Guillemot asked what happened. Not so strong anymore. The knights shouted for him to finally finish him off. Hadwin shouted for him to kill him at last. Lulatina screamed in fright. Altina told him to lose so easily it couldn't be. Lulatina noticed that Altina started running towards him. She screamed that she shouldn't do it. The triplets shouted joyfully that he would not lose. There's no way he's going to lose. Kumakicha is the strongest. He promised that he would win. Lulutina hugged the triplets and said that they were right. He would not give up so easily. She thought that Kumakicha had saved them so many times. Out of unimaginable scrapes, she went on to argue that he accepted them when people stripped them of everything. That's why they will believe in him. By all means, Kumakicha will win. Hadwin shouted at Guillemot that he had been messing with him for so long. He should just finish him off. There's no need to stand on ceremony with him. The man shouted angrily at him to shut his mouth. Guillemot thought that the bear was clearly an unusual opponent. He's a half-human warrior. He has a strong body, fangs, and claws. His whole body is a weapon. He holds his every punch. It's not that easy to kill him. Guillemot hit him again and thought he was very tough. He misses one hit after another, but it's worth it. If you encounter a strong opponent, the best thing to do is to retreat. So why doesn't he want to give up? Kumakicha thought that he was in a lot of pain. He just beats him up, and that's it. But that's the worst part. He can't even hit it. He's too strong. But all is not lost yet. The bear thought that he only needed one punch, just one precise punch. We can't give up now. His family is watching his fight. He can't lose. Jino and Kumakicha punched each other in the face at the same time. They injured each other, but it was impossible to tell who was going to fall or if the battle would continue. They were facing each other. The werewolves watched the battle from the bushes to watch their friend. Kumakicha began to sway from side to side. He thought it was bad. He's still too weak. Lulutina shouted loudly for him to continue. The bear stopped and stood steadily on the ground. The girls shouted that he was going to the front. He can do anything. Kumakicha thought that he would not let himself fall here. Blood began to flow from Guillemot's wound. He croaked angrily when he noticed this. He clenched his muscles and told Kumakichi that he wouldn't just die. His wounds healed by themselves. They started hitting each other again, but no one gave up. Kumakicha got his claws on his enemy's face. He thought that he had not wounded him deeply, but at least he had touched him. Guillemot angrily asked what he thought would defeat him already. They were hitting each other. At first, Guillemot seized the initiative and beat the bear. Then Kumakich beat the man. It went on all the time, but no one gave up. Guillaume breathed wearily. He did not expect that the battle would last so long. He swung and hit Kumakich, but the bear noticed it and tilted his head to the side. Guillemot missed. Kumakicha headbutted Guillaume in the stomach with all his might. The bear threw him to the ground. Guillemot got down on all fours and coughed. He was shocked to think how many ribs he had just broken. He argued, angrily, that he was too strong. His stomach seemed to explode from his blow. Kumakicha approached him from behind, but the man was lost in thought and did not notice it. Guillaume thought in disbelief that he was going to lose. No, his body could still fight like he could lose to a bear. Kumakicha swung and shouted that this was the end for Guillaume. The man took out his sword and stabbed the bear. He shouted that no, not yet. The girls shouted that he had a sword. He's still fighting. He raised his sword high and shouted that victory would be his. Kumakicha covered his head with his hands. Guillemot cut the bear's paws and shouted that he would chop off its paws. The man's sword split into small pieces after hitting Kumakich. The bear screamed angrily and hit Guillaume in the jaw. The man thought in shock that he had cut off both his hands. So why were they on his sword and he was still fighting? Kumakicha began to strike with his claws. He cut through Guillemot's entire chest. The man asked how he could still move. Kumakicha replied that even if the bones refused to do his will, the muscles can still. Kumakicha added that therefore no one and nothing will stop him. Guillemot fell to the ground and thought that, as expected from the divine guardian of the forest, he won. Kumakicha looked at the knights who were watching the battle. One of the nicknames said that Guillaume, the demonic captain, had been defeated. The bear looked at them angrily. The knights shouted that it was useless. They couldn't win. They started running away, screaming. Hadwin shouted angrily where they were running to. They need to stop now. They have to protect him. Kumakicha punched him in the face. Hadwin did not see who exactly hit him and angrily asked who did it. He's the Margrave's heir. You can't just hit him. He raised his head and screamed when he saw Kumakich. Hadwin fell to his knees and said in horror that he was asking for forgiveness. He won't bother him anymore. He begs to leave his miserable life. Hadwin shouted happily, which was for sure. He figured out how about serving in his army. Guillemot was so arrogant, no wonder he lost to him. The world is much better off without him. Hadwin continued shouting that he would give him whatever he wanted. He even has werewolf girls. He can take everyone away. Whatever he says about it, it's a good idea. Kumakicha bit off his head. He didn't want to listen to him anymore. Hadwin lost, he spared him once, but this time he didn't want to do it. The bear said it was disgusting. He sighed wearily. Joyful girls ran up to him. Ludotina examined the bear and said in fright that he had such terrible wounds. Kumakicha said that everything is not as bad as it seems. Altina said sadly that he looked very sickly. Lilitina said with tears in her eyes that he was in great pain. The triplets began to cry loudly. Kumakicha smiled and hugged them. Lilitina looked at them with a smile. Lilitina started crying harder and started wiping away her tears. Altina looked at him proudly. The triplets were also crying. Lilitina washed the laundry and went out to hang it on the ropes. Suddenly, it moved. It turned out to be the triplets, who laughed happily. The girl screamed at them not to scare her like that. Lilitina said with displeasure that they should not play here, otherwise the laundry would get dirty. The triplets ran away shouting that it was okay. Lilitina smiled and looked up at the sky. She said the weather was so good. Lulutina brought an empty basket into the cave. She put it on the floor and asked how Kumakich was. Altina and Lilitina were watching him. Altina said he was still sleeping it off. Lultina looked at the bandaged bear, who was sleeping. She thought it had been a few days since the battle with the humans. Because of the wounds he received, Kumakich began to have a fever, and since then, he has not left his bed. She continued to reason that both paws were broken, lacerations all over her body. With these consequences of a hard battle, he also has to fight for his life with the disease. Luatina called Kumakich softly, but he did not answer. The girl thought that the rapid advance of the soldiers was now in the past, but it was impossible to relax because there were no people in the surrounding area. She continued to reason that before returning home, she needed to make sure that they were not being followed. So many things had befallen him. To think that Kumakicha is suffering so much. Luatina wiped the sweat off his face. Altina entered the cave and said that she was at home. Luatina said she was glad to see her back. The girl asked with interest how the situation was. Altina replied that people had not even returned. Lulutina happily said that it was true. She was grateful that she had found out about it. The girl asked how about we eat. Lulutina put dried meat, venison stew, and fried pieces of wild boar on the table. The triplets happily looked at all the dishes that the girl had put on the table. Lulutina said with a smile that when they eat meat, they get energized. She thought that all this time he was lying on the floor and drinking sugared water because he couldn't open his mouth. The girl thought that, to tell the truth, she had no idea what to do with Kumakichi's share to support the polar bear. First of all, we need to restore his good health. Altina looked at the food sadly. She said they've been eating nothing but meat lately. She thinks she should eat vegetables from time to time. It's better this way. Lulutina said that it's natural for them to eat meat. Altina said that Kumakicha said that eating the same thing every day is unhealthy. Lulutina sighed in surprise. Altina looked at Luatina and said that Kumakicha also said that eating only meat with butter would make their bodies stink very much. Lulutina and Lilitina began to sniff themselves awkwardly. Altina looked at them in surprise. Lulutina said it was true. If Kumakicha says so, then you need to follow his instructions. Lulutina said that they needed a balanced diet. Lulutina said that when she was done with the meal, they would have to go out again. Altina nodded affirmatively. The triplets asked with interest where he was going to go. Lulutina replied with a smile that she would collect the ingredients. LaRose shouted that she was coming. Laro shouted that she was too. Lena screamed that if Lara was coming, then so was she. Lulutina said that apparently nothing could be done. They should listen to her and not stray far from her. Lulutina asked that they understood everything. The triplets shouted joyfully that they were coming. They all went outside together. Lulutina leaned over to the girls and said they were going. Lulutina waved at them and said that she wished them a good day. Lulutina asked in surprise that she was not going with them. The girl replied that she did not. If the sister and Altina are coming, then someone has to stay close to Kumakich. Lulutina said that was also true. She trusts Kumakichu with her. Lulutina smiled and said that it was good. The girl accompanied her sisters and went into the cave. She happily said that she was finally alone with Kumakich. The girl thought that her sister was always watching him from eye to eye, but now he was only hers. She heard a painful sigh. Lulutina ran up to Kumakiche and said in fright that he was sweating so much. The girl took a wet cloth and said that Lily would wipe everything off. The girl began to wipe it thoroughly. She looked at his paws and said that he had such terrible wounds. There are so many scars on his body because he fought for them. The girl put her hands on her chest and said that she loved Kumakich. Lulutina appeared behind her and said with displeasure that not a word more. Lulutina screamed in fright. Lulutina blushed and asked if she hadn't left a long time ago. Lulutina replied loudly that she had forgotten something at home, and, as it turned out, she should not let down her guard for a moment. Lulutina said with displeasure that she could tell him anything she wanted. She has the right to tell him about her feelings, and her sister has no excuses for everything she has done. Lulutina asked what that meant. She smiled angrily and said that it seemed that someone needed to be taught manners. Lulutina asked in fright that she was serious. Lulutina screamed at her to stop. Don't do this. The triplets entered the cave. They asked Altina with interest what they were doing. The girl replied that there were things they didn't want to know about. Lulutina was lifting rocks and logs that lay along the river. They shouted in frustration that it was empty, and it was empty, and there was nothing here. There are no vegetables anywhere. The girl told her sister that it should be. Altina interrupted her and said that they were rabbit horns. Krolorogi are horned rabbits that live all over the forest, right? Lulutina shouted angrily that these were terrible rabbits. Now that they've found out they're on their lands, they can't let them live on. The girls ran after the rabbits, shouting that they would catch them. Lulutina said they were close. They went out into the clearing and noticed a rabbit. The girl joyfully shouted that he was here. They told her to be quiet. Altina said that there are a lot more of them here than she thought, and also the rabbits are so big. Lulutina asked what they should do. Her sister replied that they couldn't just run out on them without a plan, because there were more of them. The triplets did not listen to them and ran screaming to the rabbits. Lulutina said with displeasure that then they should also go forward. The animals noticed them and started running away. Lulutina shouted that they should run faster. She thought that if it went on like this, they wouldn't catch them. You can't aimlessly chase after them. She went on to say that Kumakicha once said that you should aim at the one who is the strongest first. She noticed the slowest rabbit which was trying to catch up with its relatives. Lulutina happily thought that this was it. The girl jumped on him. Altina was watching the other rabbits. She noticed that he had stopped and shot him with a slingshot. She picked up the carcass and happily said that she had hit the bullseye. She caught him. The girl dragged him to her sisters. She met Lulutina, who was also dragging a rabbit. Lulutina happily said that Altina had done a great job. They looked at the girls who were trying to catch rabbits. Altina said she thinks it's too hard for them. Lulutina smiled and said that it might be too early for them to hunt. The girls sat down on the ground tiredly and tried to catch their breath after chasing the rabbits. The girls screamed that the triplets' meeting was starting. They whispered and ran off in different directions. One of them ran after the rabbit. They shouted at her that he was going to run away. The girl jumped out of the bushes and screamed. The rabbit ran up to her and jumped over her. The girl screamed that he jumped. Lulutina and Altina were watching them closely. The triplet grabbed the rabbit and rolled along with it on the grass. The other girls ran up to the rabbit, shouting that he would not run away now. They started biting the rabbit. The triplets brought him to Lulutina and Altini. The girls shouted proudly that they had done it. They caught one and killed it. Lulutina said in surprise that it was not bad. They came to the river and started butchering rabbits. Lulutina said with a smile that, as expected, it took a long time to kill so many. Kumakicha came and shouted that it was just fine. What a rich catch. Lulutina turned around and shouted joyfully that Kumakicha was here. She excitedly asked that he could walk. The bear replied that yes, he had slept more than enough. Now we should take a little walk. True, he can't walk on his own yet, but if he doesn't move at all, her muscles will atrophy. Lulutina said with a smile that apparently her sisters had caught a lot of rabbits. Kumakicha approached the carcasses and said that he saw quite a lot of large dead rabbits here. He told Lieutenant and Altina that the two of them had done a great job and butchered them well. He looked at the rabbits and said that they also needed to have their heads separated. Ulutina asked that the heads also need to be removed. Kumakicha said that rabbit brains are stunningly delicious, a surprisingly rich delicacy. The bear thought that the insides were not something to be neglected. He went on to argue that brains are full of fats and protein, and it's hard to imagine a more nutritious product. Lilatina picked up something and asked what those green things were. Kumakicha replied that it was rabbit shit. Lilatina immediately gave it up. The bear said that the grass runs through the entire esophagus almost untouched, which is why it is so green. Lilatina looked at her hands that were holding it. She was very disgusted. Kumakicha thought that the Matagi tribe considered it nutritious and even added it to their food. He continued to reason that this Mataji guy's hunting dish was amazing. When it comes to survival, you can't overdo it. Kumakicha awkwardly said that, however, he was not attracted to eating. The triplets screamed that they had caught a rabbit. They surrounded him and caught him. Kumakicha said it was amazing. They laughed happily. Liutina asked when they were done here. Then they were going home. Kumakicha replied that he did. He asks to help her at least a little. The girl replied with a smile that it was fine. Kumakicha said that he was a little tired of the sugared water. Liutina happily said that she would make rabbit stew today. He just has to wait. The bear replied that there is no problem. Kumakicha met with Joseph. The guy happily asked that his wounds would heal soon. The bear replied that he had already. He's glad it didn't take long. Kumakicha proudly added that he was lucky to be a tough guy. Joseph said with a smile that in just half a month, it was simply impressive. He's very happy about it. Joseph said that one way or another, but they defeated Guillemot. Kumakicha has not only a strong body, but also an unsurpassed fighting spirit. He never ceases to admire him. Kumakicha awkwardly told him to stop. Joseph said that now he is considered the white guardian angel of the forest. People came with offerings and left them in the forest. The bear thought awkwardly that it was true. An altar was built at the very entrance to the forest, where offerings were piled day by day, and all this for only one reason. The bear continued to reason that it was all because he had won by defending this forest. Due to the deaths of Guillemot and Hadwin, a full-scale war was supposed to start with the Margrave of Coldridge, but it did not happen because a coup d'etat began in the capital. Kumakicha thought, who would have thought that rumors about a white god who punishes villains would be able to spread because of this? Joseph said with a smile that, in general, he was glad that he would meet with his family today. Joseph happily said that he couldn't wait to meet his wife, whom he was so proud of. He won't be surprised if she's as fluffy as he is. He'd rather see her. Kumakicha thought awkwardly that he wasn't sure how to tell him the right thing. He doesn't really want to think about it right now. He invited Joseph to his house to celebrate his recovery and victory. The bear continued to argue that he still had not resolved the misunderstanding with Joseph about the girls, how he would react to them, and how they reacted to him. That's what's bothering him right now. They came to the house of Kumakich and the girls. They sat down by the campfire. Ulutina handed Joseph a mug with a smile and said that maybe this tea was far from ideal, but the richer the better. Joseph said that he asked her not to worry about it. Kumakicha felt something strange behind his back. He turned his head and saw the triplets. He was surprised to think that the triplets were shy now. Suddenly, he felt bigger hands on his fur. It turned out to be Altina, who was hiding behind his back. Kumakicha thought that even Altina was here. He wouldn't be surprised if werewolves were terribly shy. The bear told Joseph that the drink was not poisoned. He could drink safely. Liutina laughed and shouted that he was so stupid. She seemed to hit him as a joke. Kumakicha thought hard about why it hurt so much. He didn't understand. Liutina stared at him and said with displeasure that she would never have sent the food. Joseph blushed and shouted that he was not. He wasn't thinking about it at all. The guy added that it was fair. He's going to try it now. Joseph drank some tea and shouted that it was so hot. Kumakicha wondered what had become of him. Since when did he choose his words so carefully? Being a good guy doesn't suit him. Liutina leaned over to Joseph and said that his clothes were soaked. The guy blushed and shouted that he wasn't. There's nothing to worry about. He's fine, really. Joseph bowed and shouted that he asked ma'am not to think about him. Liutina asked in surprise that she was a ma'am. Joseph asked her that she was Kumakich's wife, wasn't she? The guy added that someone like him should treat her with respect. Lulutina smiled and happily said that she was Kumakicha's wife. It was so amazing. Lulutina, displeased, told her to make her face simpler. She looks really creepy right now. Joseph asked Lulutina with interest what she meant. Lulutina leaned over to Joseph and shouted joyfully that she begged him to address her on any occasion. Whatever. If he thinks she and Kumakicha are together, then he's like a little brother to her. She made sure that Joseph could always rely on her. Kumakicha looked in surprise at her tail, which was swinging from side to side. The girl was very happy. Joseph said that he thanked her for her work. Lulutina happily shouted that there was no need to be shy. Everything was just fine. The girl hit the girl with her tail. Lilitina said irritably that Lilitina was stupid. The stars appeared in the sky, and everyone went about their business. Altina supervised the stew, while Lilitina cut the meat. The sisters are busy cooking now. Joseph approached Kumakiche and shouted, which was very cruel of him. He didn't say she was so charming. The bear looked at the guy and asked that he was blushing like a tomato. He was fine. Joseph complained and told him to stop joking. It's not like he's hiding it. Kumakiche was asked with interest that he does not know how to communicate with girls. Joseph replied that no, it's not that he doesn't know how to communicate with a girl. He just didn't expect to see Lulutin. That is, no, he meant Altina. Kumakiche told him to do it again. Joseph said he was somewhat interested in her. Kumakiche thought that everything was bad. We need to call the police. There's a guy who likes little girls. The bear continued to reason that this was why Altina was so scared. Everything is bad, he has to cut off something for him. Joseph shouted that no, he had to understand him correctly. Joseph went on to say that she looked exactly like his sister, whom he had to leave behind in the village. Kumakiche looked at him in surprise. Joseph awkwardly said that was it. Kumakiche asked what it was exactly. He thought he remembered Joseph saying something about the village he had to leave. He continued to argue that everyone has moments from the past that they are not in the mood to share with others. And after he saw their happy family, Kumakiche asked why they shouldn't have a drink. What would he say about it? Joseph said with a smile that his claws had sunk into his shoulder. Could he please take them away? Kumakiche and Joseph looked at the happy girls with smiles. Lilitina poured it for him, saying that here was a drink. Kumakiche said he was grateful to her. Kumakiche poured for his friend and said with a laugh that they should drink one each first. He would handle it. The guy laughed and said that they, the dark elves, were noble merry men. Joseph drank and shouted happily that it was a great drink. Kumakiche asked with interest what really went so well. The guy poured him a cup and said with a smile that he should try it himself. The bear drank and talked, which is pretty good. Joseph said it was really a pretty good drink. They always see good things at a glance. Kumakiche noticed the triplets drooling over the pot. The bear thought that yes, until he starts eating, they won't either. Werewolves obey a strict hierarchy. They cannot make decisions on their own. He went on to reason that if their eldest, in other words, he, didn't start eating, then neither would they. Lulutina sternly told the girls that it was not allowed yet. Kumakiche thought that in conditions of strict discipline, this takes a terrible turn at all. The bear smilingly told Lulutina to give him his portion. His conscience will devour him because of the girls. The girl happily shouted that, of course. They started happily eating the cooked food. The girls quickly devoured their portions. They were very hungry. Altina was serving the food, and Lulutina was carrying it. Kumakiche noticed how Joseph picked up his mug and bumped it against his own. They started chatting merrily. Kumakiche thought that the next morning, Joseph was still a little drunk, but he came home smiling. As soon as he left, Kumakiche went hunting. The bear thought that tracks of a huge animal had been left near the shelter, despite the fact that not a single trap had worked. He followed the tracks, and it turned out to be a huge deer. Kumakiche climbed a tree and thought that he didn't seem to notice him. You need to get closer. Sneak up and not to the ground. Suddenly, a deer was shot with fire. Kumakiche looked at him in surprise. He noticed a girl who happily shouted that she had done it. If it's Rikata's magic, then even he will become prey for her. Kumakiche looked at her in shock. Rikata approached the deer carcass and proudly asked what he thought of its magic. The bear smiled and thought it was a little elf witch. Rikata shouted joyfully that now her grandmother would surely admit that she had already grown up. She climbed on the deer, when suddenly, he jumped up and ran away. and the girl fell to the ground. Kumakicha awkwardly thought that her prey had just run away. He came up to her and asked her worriedly that she was okay. She wasn't in much pain when she fell. Ricotta replied that she did not. The girl saw that she was talking to a bear and jumped up from the ground in fright. She screamed loudly for him to stay where he was and not come near her. Kumakicha thought that her legs were shaking. Apparently, she couldn't walk on her own. Since she had interrupted his long-awaited hunt, he should take advantage of this situation. She thrust her staff forward and shouted for him to receive. Nothing happened. She screamed in shock. Why is the fire not coming out? And there is nothing. Kumakicha smiled slyly and thought, which means she can't use magic again. A tearful little witch, how sweet that is. The girl looked at him in fright. Ricotta screamed loudly at him not to eat her. She doesn't want to die. Kumakicha excitedly shouted that he was to blame. He's asking for forgiveness. But don't cry now. He's not a sneaky polar bear. The girl pouted and hit the bear on the leg. She screamed angrily that if he wasn't an evil monster, he would have said so right away. Kumakicha awkwardly said that he was asking for forgiveness. He was not angry. Ricotta shouted at him not to embarrass her like that. She continued kicking him. Kumakicha said that inhale and exhale. The girl made him lose his temper, and he picked her up by her leg. The bear angrily said that it seemed that someone here lacked manners. Ricotta screamed that she had been abducted. She was asking for help. Kumakicha said that's not it. Not even once. The girl hid behind a tree and looked at him resentfully. The bear said that he is Kumakichi, and he is not a monster, but just a polar bear living in this forest. Ricotta said that if that was the case, then there was no need to scare her. She is Ricotta, a witch from the proud elf nation. She lives in the inner part of this forest. If he hasn't heard of her, then he must have been here only a short time. Kumakicha thought that she was an elf. She is one of those legendary elves who are so often mentioned in fantasy worlds. Displeased, she asked what he was staring at now. Ricotta added that he should not think that he could look at her beautiful appearance. Kumakicha laughed. The girl screamed angrily. What's so funny? He shouldn't laugh at a noble lady. Kumakicha made a serious face and said it was okay. He apologizes for that. Ricotta awkwardly said that she was glad that everything had gone smoothly here. She asked how they would solve this problem. Kumakicha asked in surprise what the problem was. Ricotta screamed that he had mocked her womanhood, and now he had to make up for it right away. Kumakicha thought in shock that she wanted him to make up for something. Even if he agrees to her terms, he's a bear. How can you repay anything? The bear said he was sorry, but he didn't have any money. In return, he can wash her laundry if she wants. Ricotta shouted in embarrassment that he hadn't seen anything. The girl screamed even louder that he hadn't seen anything. Nothing was happening to her. It is forbidden to talk about it from now on. Kumakicha was shocked to think that she had changed her shoes so quickly. Ricotta said that even though he was a bear, he should be noble towards a girl of marriageable age who had shown herself to be inappropriate. She added that he must take responsibility. Kumakicha asked in surprise what to take responsibility for. Sheepishly, Ricotta said that it wasn't that she wanted to, but he would have taken him as her husband. Ricotta screamed that she was doing it under duress, and that was all. Kumakicha wondered what she was talking about right now. The bear asked that she was just joking now. The girl punched him in the chest and told him to stop fooling around. He should give her the opportunity to climb on his back. Walking while looking at his bestial face is beyond her strength. Kumakicha said softly that he understood it anyway. He helped the girl onto her back. The bear asked with interest how far he should carry her. She screamed that it was her house, of course, but it wasn't clear. Ricotta nuzzled into his fur and happily told him that he was so fluffy. It's so comfortable to ride. Her respects to him. Kumakicha sighed wearily. The girl said that his sword is so white. Compared to the brown fur of werewolves, it is much more beautiful. Kumakicha replied that he was grateful to her for the compliment. Ricotta shouted in displeasure that he should know when a girl says a compliment to him. A man should also pay a compliment. Otherwise, their married life will be nasty and not long. Kumakicha tiredly said that he would try it now. Her silver-colored hair is so soft and silky, and her eyes are big and cute like wild strawberries. Ricotta blushed and said that he had left her no choice. She would stay with him today. Kumakicha was shocked to think that it was so sudden, and she wasn't too relaxed. He continued to reason that she would surely make some fool her toy in the near future. It bothers him. From that moment on, he continued chatting with the cute girl. Kumakicha thought that during this time they had gone quite far from the log cabin and had reached the northern edge of the forest. Basically, if she killed a huge moose herself, then her grandmother could have recognized Ricotta as an adult witch. Ricotta screamed that she would force her grandmother to behave with her like an adult. Kumakicha thought that he had been listening to her complaints for a long time about living with an overprotective mother who did not understand her. The bear thought that she often talked about how her father died in the war when she was a child, and also the only one. It's not surprising that she's being taken care of like this. Kumakicha went on to say that Ricotta was surprisingly good at holding on, but as soon as he told her about the dangers of the forest, she burst into tears. He thought he didn't want to hurt her, but the crying Ricotta was quiet, like a normal child. Deep down, she's a really good girl. Kumakicha and Ricotta lit a fire and sat next to him. The girl happily said that she was so warm now. She asked with a smile that he could do everything, wasn't she? And she was very grateful to him, wasn't she? And she was very grateful to him. Kumakicha replied that, yes, you're welcome. She looked at him with displeasure and asked that he couldn't be more cheerful. The bear said that you shouldn't sit so close to the fire, you'll get burned. The bear looked up at the dark sky and thought that the ancient forest was so irresponsible to wander through the forest in the dark with a little girl. Moreover, she doesn't know how she's going to get home. Kumakicha stroked the sleeping girl's head, and she said that her grandmother was there. The bear thought that it was quite normal to be calm at her age. The bear began to look at the stars. He thought he was just going to hunt close to home, but ended up spending the night somewhere unknown. He's not sure if he'll be able to get back in a day. Lulutina and the girls are probably going crazy with excitement. A new day has arrived. Ricotta climbed onto the bear's back, and they set off again. The girl called out to him with a smile. Kumakicha asked what it was. Ricotta happily said that when they got home, she would definitely introduce him to her mom. After all, now they will live together like a real family. She added with a smile that he would guard them day and night from everything bad. Kumakicha listened to him and thought about how soon they would be at her house. He would challenge her and run away. They entered a clearing, and Kumakicha sighed in surprise. He thought it was as if they had come through some kind of barrier. It's a very strange feeling, but nothing wrong. Ricotta jumped off his back and shouted joyfully that she recognized this place. She quickly ran forward. Kumakicha shouted for her to wait for him. Ricotta didn't listen to him. Kumakicha remained standing behind the trees. He saw a beautiful house, from which a woman came out and joyfully spread her arms for a hug. Ricotta definitely recognized her. Kumakicha thought they had a very nice house, but this woman turned out to be the girl's mother. The woman happily said that, thank heavens, she was back. The bear thought he'd better go home, until they remembered about it. He returned to his home. Kumakicha happily waved his paw at the girls who were waiting for him. Lulutina and Lilitina were the first to run up to him. They hugged him tightly. Kumakicha said he was glad to see them too. Then Altina appeared and flew into the bear at full speed. Kumakicha sighed and thought it actually hurt. The triplets came running and knocked him to the ground. Lulutina looked at him worriedly. The bear said he was sorry. He was a little late. Lulutina began to cry and joyfully shouted that she had already begun to think that he would not return. Kumakicha hugged the triplets and replied that he would never leave them. She's so sensitive. The bear stroked her head to calm her down. Lulutina said she was afraid to imagine what would have happened to them if it hadn't been for him. They all entered the house together. The triplets refused to let go of the bear. Kumakicha said with a smile that Lana, Lalo, and Lalo are just like children. The girls started licking his fur to show how bored they were. Lala shouted that she likes to be called a child. Lalo said that she did too. Lana said that she also likes to be a small child. Lulutina said with a laugh that she was so sorry. But they missed him so much. Kumakicha told her not to worry. They always behave like this. Everything is fine. Lulutina said that, by the way, he usually returned at night. Had the moose really taken him so far? Kumakicha awkwardly said that everything was wrong about the moose. In fact, he met a huge mouse. The bear added that she managed to escape unfortunately. He thought she would be a wonderful decoration for their table, so he got so carried away with the chase that he completely lost count. The triplet bent over him and smelled a strange smell. Lulutina, and Altina looked at him intently. Kumakicha thought in horror that the smell seemed to have remained. He continued to reason that the explanation would be so complicated, and he hoped to keep it a secret. The girls complained that they were wondering where he was from. Lulutina approached him and sternly told him to take the trouble to explain his behavior. Lulutina called her displeased. The triplet said she'd better make sure for herself, and the sooner the better. The evil Altina came up to him from behind. Lulutina smiled and said she was sorry, but she just needed to check something. He had to let her see his innocence. Kumakicha ran out of the house shouting that he was sorry, but he would leave for a minute. The girls ran after him, shouting for him to stop. He's not behaving like a man. Kumakicha thought that he didn't care about masculinity. He was a bear. But still, the situation smelled very bad. Of course he smells, he knows what to do. The bear jumped into a hot spring. The girls reached him and looked at him in surprise. Kumakicha awkwardly said what could be better than a refreshing bath after a long day. He looked at the disgruntled girls and added that it was a heavenly pleasure. The triplets were the last to arrive at the source. They happily noticed that Kumakicha was swimming. The girls quickly undressed and ran to splash in the water. Lala shouted that she wanted to take a bath with Kumakichi. Lala replied that she did too. Lalo said that she really wanted to. The triplets started playing with him in the water. Kumakicha happily thought that everything ingenious was simple. He heard the sounds that Lulutina, and Altina were making. He thought tensely that their grunts and growls were a little scary. Lulutina angrily shouted at him not to try to hide from serious conversations in the bathroom anymore. The next morning came. Kumakicha thought intensely that girls had never paid so much attention to him before. They literally watch his every move. He went on to say that sometimes they cross the line. Kumakicha awkwardly asked Altina that she could at least not keep an eye on him while he was doing natural things. Altina confidently replied that Lulutina had told her to keep her eyes on Kumakichi. The bear happily said that, at least for now, she could leave him alone. Altina said that it was fine. She would make sure later. Kumakicha asked in surprise what she wanted to make sure of. Lulutina was also watching him. Kumakicha could feel their gazes. With tears in his eyes, he thought that such distrust on their part would come back to him. The bear said that he was already scared. Kumakicha thought that the days were passing, and the warm summer and rainy autumn were coming to an end. Winter will come to their forest soon. The bear was walking through the forest and looking for something in it. Kumakicha saw the acorns and shouted joyfully that they had finally found them, and there were so many of them. We need to collect as much as possible. Suddenly, the triplets quickly climbed on top of him. The bear awkwardly told the girls that he would not be able to carry both them and the acorns. Altina came up and sternly said that her sister had told her not to leave Kumakichi alone for a second. Kumakicha thought that the forest favored them today, and their catch of nuts was proof of that. Together with Altina and the girls, they went to collect acorns. The bear thought that it looked like he was still under suspicion. The girls got off him and started picking acorns. Kumakicha thought they were still children. They still can't resist the temptation to pick acorns. The girl came up to him and shouted joyfully for him to see what kind of acorn she had brought. This one is completely round. The girls came up to her and said admiringly that she was so smooth, she had such luck. Kumakicha said it was an acorn from a holly oak tree. Altina showed them another acorn and said that this one had a hat. The bear said that this acorn is a bamboo oak. The girl screamed that she had such a beautiful acorn. Lalo screamed that she wanted one too. Kumakicha thought that, speaking of acorns, this is a typical example of acorns that are familiar to everyone, round and tapering towards the base. He continued to argue that there is no limit to the use of acorns. The Neanderthals, who collected them in large numbers, made them their main food. Kumakicha thought they were drying them and grinding them into flour for further storage. You can make liver, tofu, and flour from their acorns. Kumakicha went to another clearing and said that there might be a pile of acorns over there. They should take a look. The bear looked at the ground and saw a flock of wild boars. The triplets complained that they were eating their acorns. Kumakicha shouted at them not to come any closer. Kumakicha and Altonina began to approach them slowly. The bear told the girl to keep up with him. Kumakicha and the boar growled loudly at each other. The polar bear grabbed the boar by the tusks and broke them. The boar grunted. Komakicha thought that he still didn't want to give up. The bear grabbed the boar and threw it. He wondered what he would do now after this. He heard a screech and looked towards the boar. The animal ran into the depths of the forest. Komakicha shouted in fright that it was bad. He's running away from here. The bear noticed a man in a hood. Komakicha said in surprise that someone was there. The boar was just running towards the stranger. The bear screamed at him to leave. The guy took out his sword and defeated the boar. Komakicha looked at the man and said that it looked like it was his prey. The man cut open the belly of the boar and took out its heart. He ate it with gusto right there. He licked his lips and said with a smile that it was delicious. That's all he needs. They can take the rest. Komakicha asks what he was sure of. He runs away but leaves all the meat. He can take more. The man confidently said that he does not need food. When you take a life, use it to continue your own. He just puts the burden on them. The man looked at the girls and added that he had so many hungry mouths. The girls hid behind the bear. The man said that there was no need to be shy. He went on to say that children are a treasure. No matter how many people destroy each other, the next generations will always come in their place. They're still afraid of him anyway, although it's no wonder their meeting was so sudden. The bear looked at the guy and said his name was Komakicha. The man replied that he was a Drahomir, a simple wanderer. The bear was surprised to think that he was a simple wanderer. He would not say that. Drahomir put on his hood and said he was done here. It's time for him to continue his journey. Komakicha said that then. The man said there was no need to say goodbye. They'll see each other again. Drahomir added that their paths will cross again when fate wills it. Komakicha looked after him. Meeting again, whether they will be allies or enemies. Lala was shaking the necklace in her hands. She screamed at the sisters that it was hers. Lalo shouted that no, Lalo should keep it for himself. Wana said loudly that she would take it. Lulatina angrily shouted at them to be quiet. They will give the jewelry to their sister. Komakicha awkwardly watched their quarrels. The girl tried to calm her sisters down, but nothing worked. Lulatina asked that she was not ashamed. She has the same age and status. Lulatina screamed that she wasn't ashamed. She is more worthy of Komakichi's mercy than they are. Komakicha was surprised to think that mercy. He looks like an emperor. Ruler Polar Bear 1 doesn't sound bad. However, he would never have suggested that an ordinary decoration could create so many problems. The bear thought that he just wanted to occupy himself after a hearty dinner together. Komakicha was examining the boar's teeth. Lulatina asked what was wrong. She asked if he was going to do anything about it. Komakicha replied that he did. He has a couple of ideas on how to use it. The girl said it was the tusk of the boar they had cooked. Komakicha said they have to work at night. Watching them work, he was inspired by them and also decided to do something. So he uses it first. Lulatina asked what it was in his hands. Komakicha said that this is a concrete amoeba. It is an easy-to-use natural filler. It looks like mastic and it's extremely valuable. Komakicha thought that, of course, it didn't seem useful to the girls. He could make a beautiful piece of jewelry out of it. But you'll have to fill them out first. He continued to argue that, according to Joseph, this concrete amoeba is made from the remains of river animals. It hardens upon contact with air. The bear thought that was why it would be ideal for processing the canine. The babies are already asleep, thanks to their full bellies. Now he has time for needlework. Komakicha thought that he was using it for the first time, as they say. An attempt is not torture. First, he will pour the solution into the fang. It will apply whitewash to prevent dirt from entering the cracks. He drilled a hole for the thread. Immediately after pouring, the concrete will begin to harden. He uses a file to shape it. Then she strings the small glass beads she bought earlier. He looked at the finished jewelry and thought it looked good. All that remains is to choose the right size so that the girls can wear it. Despite all the difficulties, it turned out to be extremely exciting to make it. A new day came, and Komakicha went outside to examine the jewelry in the sun. He thought it was great. He spent the whole night at work. Laura came out and saw the jewelry. She excitedly shouted that Laura wanted to take a closer look. The bear said he only made it. She should be careful. The girl screamed joyfully. Komakicha thought that even if it was small, she is still a girl. For her, this trinket is a real treasure. Lara asked what it was, and he found it. Kumakicha replied that he did not. He made it himself last night. Kumakicha turned away and thought that she wanted him. It's written all over her face. Lara asked hopefully that she was a good girl. She could leave him. Kumakicha thought that initially. He wanted to give it to Lulatina as the keeper of the hearth. The girls ran out shouting what they were discussing. They said they were asking to see it. Lulatina came out and said with a smile that it was so lively outside. Kumakicha got up early today. Lulutinja noticed the jewelry and loudly asked what it was, the very thing he wanted to make last night. She ran up to the girls, shouting that it was hers. She told Lala to be a good girl and gave the jewelry to her. Frightened, Lala climbed onto Kumakicha's back. Lulatina shouted angrily at her not to dare to run away. Lulatina and Altina came out. Lulatina asked with a smile what it was. Altina said it was so noisy, it was impossible to sleep. Kumakicha thought that was how the confrontation began. Lulita shouted that they left no choice but to use brute force. Lulatina grabbed her by the hand and told her to stop this farce. Lulutina told her not to interfere with her. As an older sister, she couldn't give in to them. Lulutina asked that she was not ashamed. Kumakicha had been watching her childish behavior all this time. Lulutina blushed and hugged the bear. Lulutina said that he had already seen everything, it was useless. She looked at the girls and said what about them. Lalo fell to the ground and screamed that she wanted him. Lulutina said with displeasure that they had said it was useless to try to put pressure on her, and she was also getting on everyone's nerves. Lulutina said that it was time for her to grow up, and as a sign of reconciliation, she should give this jewelry. Lulutina told her to shut up now. The girls conferred and approached Lalo. Lala said that she was giving the jewelry to her, so there was no need to cry. Lalo got up from the ground and asked that it was true. Lala said loudly that she and Lala agreed. So her older sisters agreed to give it to her. Kumakicha said that these babies have their own hierarchy. Lulutina said that speaking of triplets, their birth order is Lala, Lana, and Lalo. In werewolf families, the order of birth is very important. The bear asked Lala that she agreed with this. She saw him first and wanted him the most. Lala said with a smile that she was the oldest, so Lala could refrain. The bear replied that it was clear. If she has made a decision, she must stick to it. Kumakicha added that he could also decorate each of them. Lulutina hugged the girls and said that they were both such good sisters. Just amazing. Kumakicha thought with tears in his eyes that it was so beautiful. His eyes are already wet. Lulutina approached Lalo and said that she wanted to borrow a piece of jewelry. She loves her older sister very much. Altina came up and kicked her to get away from the girl. Lulutina said that usually Lulutina is a symbol of their family, but now she has fallen so low. Kumakicha said that he could not understand why she was so fascinated by this trinket. Lulutina replied that it was so ignorant of him. Every gift is important to a woman, especially if the one who gives it is important to her. Kumakicha thought he was trying to say that it didn't make any sense. He's a polar bear, but it's better if he doesn't say anything. The bear continued to argue that now the confrontation was over, and like yesterday's acorn harvest, it would sink into oblivion. Suddenly, Ricotta appeared, who was attacked by the triplets. The girl screamed at Kumakicha not to just stand there, he had to help her deal with them. Kumakicha thought that they would always be replaced by something else. The triplets brought the exhausted Ricotta. The triplets asked furiously if she was alive. Kumakicha said that it was possible. Ricotta shouted angrily that he should not dare to say that. Lulutina asked that this was Little Elf, and how would he explain all this? Kumakicha told the whole story. The girl said that it was clear now. He only walked her home. Lulutina added that it was worth worrying about such a trifle and especially hiding it from them. Kumakicha awkwardly said that he was asking for forgiveness. It was difficult for him to even talk about it. Lulutina smiled and said that it was okay. She forgave him. Ricotta looked at the bear with interest. Kumakicha told her that this lovely lady's name was Lulutina. He pointed to the girls and said that these cuties were Lala, Lalo, and Lana. They were triplets. He lives with them, the last of the werewolf clan. Ricotta hummed thoughtfully. She looked at Lulutina and said that she looked good, for a wanderer who spent a couple of months in the forest. Lulutina smiled and said that she was grateful to her. Lulutina leaned over to the girl and asked what they could do for her. She must have gotten lost during her walk. Kumakicha thought that Lulutina, as always, was calm. Rakata asked that her name was Lilatina. The girl answered that it was, and asked what was the matter. The girl asked brazenly if Lilatina was deaf. Her house was too far away for her to meet Kumakichi by chance. Lilatina's face darkened, but she tried to calm down. She laughed and said sweetly that it was true. He had mentioned it, but Rakata knew that the forest was no place for little children. Rakata ran to the bear. She screamed for him to look. Mommy gave her this magic ball. With him, she will never get lost again. He doesn't have to worry about it. If you unwind it, it disappears. Rakata turned her back to him and said that if you go back, the thread starts to glow. Kumakichi said that it was clear. It looked like she was drawing with her tail. Rakata said that she had followed a magical trail from the place where she had first met Kumakakik. Kumakik asked, well, and now could she not go back the same way? Lilatina smiled evilly and told Rakata that she shouldn't interrupt her sister when she was talking to her. It was very rude. The girl impudently asked when she had become her sister. Rakata asked, speaking of stupidity, if she had just interrupted her. Lilatina began to breathe loudly and began to stretch her arms. She said angrily that she was just a little wretch. Kumakichi thought with fear that Lilatina had lost her temper. She shouldn't crack her knuckles like that. It's bad for her bones. Rakata cried out awkwardly, asking what the triplets were doing now. The girls started sniffing him. Rakata blushed and screamed loudly what was going on. Kumakichi thought in surprise that they were now taking turns sniffing her. He turned to Lilatina and asked what they were doing. The girl was not in her previous place. She hid behind his back and blushed. Lilatina awkwardly said that she had let her anger get the better of her. Rakata asked discontentedly what they needed. The triplets joyfully shouted that they should collect acorns together. The girl looked at them in surprise and said that she didn't mind. The girls began to collect acorns together. Kumakichi looked at them with a smile and thought that everything was fine now. The triplets had managed to keep her busy. Lilatina called the bear. Kumakichi asked what was going on. The girl answered that it was getting dark soon. She thought they should take Rakata home so she wouldn't have to walk in the dark. Kumakichi looked at the sky and thought that he remembered the way home and would be able to get her there quickly. But if he sent her home, she would not make it before dark. The bear looked at the girls and thought that Rakata had a magic ball, but it would not help her much in the dark forest full of dangers. What should she do? Lilatina said with a smile that her sister could have told him to let her go home. Kumakichi said that yes, perhaps that was true. The girl smiled and approached Rakata to explain everything to her. Kumakichi thought with a smile that at the end of the day, Lilatina remained the same sweet older sister. The triplets hugged Rakata with tears in their eyes and said goodbye to her. The girl climbed onto the bear's back and they walked to her house. The triplets screamed for Rakata to come again. Lilatina waved goodbye. The girl said with a smile that she had told me she was not Rakata. Kumakichi told her that they had to take her home quickly. She had to grab onto him and try not to fall. Rakata said okay. Kumakichi ran quickly. The triplets screamed, saying goodbye to her. The girl cried out joyfully. It was so great. She didn't even need a ball of yarn. Kumakichi thought that, remembering the way, he decided to take the shortcut. He hoped that he could get there before sunset. Rakata happily shouted that he was not bad, as expected from her husband. The bear asked discontentedly why she was still talking such nonsense. For the record, she did tell her mother where she was going. Rakata looked away and mumbled awkwardly. Kumakichi shouted discontentedly. Rakata looked and shouted that it was terrible. She told her about him, and she decided that he had fooled her, that she was still too young, that he was using her and other nonsense. The girl added that, they had already agreed to get married. She wouldn't change anything anyway. Kumakichi, shocked, shouted at her to wait a bit. The bear asked worriedly that perhaps he was imposing himself. But what exactly had she told her mother? Rakata replied that there was nothing unusual in her story. The girl said she had a fateful encounter with a stranger. He was a bit rough, but she eventually agreed to be his wife. Kumakichi shouted at her to stop. Rakata asked discontentedly what was wrong. It was all his fault, especially since he saw something he shouldn't have seen. He had to take responsibility. The bear thought fearfully that once they got there, he would throw her as far as he could and run. He hopes it's just childish babble. No adult would believe the plan could work. Suddenly, they met a woman who joyfully shouted that she had found Ricotta. The girl jumped off the bear's back and ran to meet the stranger. She screamed that it was her mother. Ricotta told her that it was Kumakicha. She had long wanted to introduce them. The woman tensed up and said that it was he, the swindler, who decided to deceive her daughter. He was a dirty forest god. The woman said with tears in her eyes that she thought that in such a secluded place they, mother and daughter, could finally find peace. Her sweet Ricotta, her little wildflower. Kumakicha awkwardly told Ricotta's mother to calm down and let him explain the misunderstanding by calling her mother. She told him not to dare call her that. The woman was really very angry with Kumakicha after her daughter's story. The bear felt uneasy thinking that he had been attacked with false accusations. The woman said with displeasure that he thought that if he became a local god, then no woman could stop him. The woman screamed that she was not like that. She would not give him a chance. She, like the great hero, would give him a worthy battle. She shot a stream of magic at him. Kumakicha dodged and shouted that it was close. He thought with fear, this is news. If she touches him, but he is a corpse. And how should he stop her? This is Ricotta's mother. What should he do? She fired again and hit a tree, which broke into pieces. Ricotta screamed at her to stop. The girl ran towards the bear, but fell down next to him. Kumakicha thought that he couldn't lose sight of her. The third wave wouldn't be long in coming. Suddenly, a thick fog appeared, and when it began to disappear, Kumakicha saw a woman lying unconscious. Ricotta said worriedly that she shouldn't overexert herself like that. She knew about it. She always just collapses when she uses magic. Kumakicha thought that was her limit. Ricotta asked worriedly what she should do. Her mother was unconscious. Kumakicha replied that now they could only take her home. The bear picked her up. He said that, by the way, she looked very young. Ricotta replied that she was only 22 years old. She was born when my mother was 14. Kumakicha said that she was so young. They went into the house and the bear asked Ricotta to bring cold water and prepare salt and sugar. The girl replied that yes, she would in a jiffy. The woman woke up and said that it seemed she had jumped to conclusions a little. She blushed deeply and awkwardly said that it was unforgivable on her part. Kumakicha said that there was no need to worry about it. She was taking care of and protecting her own daughter. The woman said, upset, that she shouldn't have behaved that way anyway. Ricotta hugged her mother. The woman looked at her daughter and said, just think Ricotta brought her friend. And she was talking to him like that now. She blushed and covered her face with her hands. She said embarrassedly that she was such a terrible girl. Kumakicha spoke excitedly to calm down his mother. The bear continued to say that anyone else in a similar situation would have wet themselves from fear. No need to blame yourself like that. Ricotta blushed and cried out in displeasure. Who wet themselves? The woman began to cry and said admiringly that Kumakicha was so restrained and patient. The bear thought in surprise that mother and daughter were like two peas in a pod, even thinking alike. Kumakicha looked at the happy woman and thought that this was already alarming. Ricotta called him. The bear asked with interest what she needed. The girl angrily screamed at him not to dare stare at her mother like that. Kumakicha thought in shock at what had just happened. The woman looked at their faces and laughed. She said with a smile that the two of them were so close. Kumakicha thought that Robiola, Ricotta's mother, was so sweet. He continued to reason that he should stop. She was younger than him. Did his maternal instinct awaken? The woman called Kumakicha to listen to her. She said that this meek woman would never attack such a benefactor as he. If he wished to take her worthless life as a punishment, she would not object. The woman said with a smile that as long as he could use her body as he wished, as his servant, she would not complain. Kumakicha looked at her tiredly. The bear said that everyone had the right to make mistakes. She shouldn't blame herself so much. Robiola cried out in alarm that she was still sorry. He should at least let her apologize properly. The woman said that she was asking to be allowed to atone for her guilt. Ricotta screamed loudly that it was enough. She forbade them. The girl began to grimace in front of Kumakicha. Ricotta smiled and told him to look here. If he was staring at her mommy, he should pay attention to her too. So he was thinking about her right now. Kumakicha looked at her with disappointment. Ricotta cried out in displeasure that she was asking to beg her. Well, what kind of expression was that? Robiola called her daughter angrily and pulled her by the ears. The woman said that this was unbecoming behavior for a lady. Ricotta screamed that it hurt. The girl said that she was trying out her feminine charms on him. Ricotta screamed that it was all Kumakichi's fault. He was too thick-skinned. The bear thought with displeasure that he was now also to blame. Robiola screamed Ricotta's name loudly. The woman said that the only one guilty now was herself and her lies. She did not dare to blame Kumakik for something that was only her fault. Kumakik nodded his head in agreement and said that it was true. He thought she was such a naughty child. Robiola took out her whip and said that it seemed time for her to receive her deserved punishment. She began to spank her. Ricotta screamed loudly, asking her mother to forgive her. Robiola said discontentedly that she should not even hope for forgiveness. She was a very bad girl. The woman handed him the thing to punish and said that Kumakicha could not take part as well. He was, after all, the victim of her mischief. The bear awkwardly asked what he was, too. Kumakicha picked up the whip and thought that he did not support such methods of education, and it did not seem that the blow would be painful. The bear hit her with this object. He thought he would do it gently by polar bear standards, of course. Ricotta started to yell a little. Kumakicha hit her a few times and asked, "What about this? And how about this?" The girl screamed loudly. Robiola asked what was wrong. Ricotta happily told Kumakichi that she had been such a bad girl. She had been terribly, terribly bad. She was begging to be punished. Robiola said that it seemed Ricotta had learned her lesson. They would leave her there until next time. The bear thought that perhaps a polar bear should never punish an elf. Kumakicha thought that he was about to leave them after seeing the execution, but they insisted that he stay. He could not refuse them. They had dinner together and decided to have tea. The bear said with a smile that it was wonderful. He had not dined in such an elegant setting for a long time. Robiola looked out the window and said that he had completely lost track of time. Kumakicha thought with fear that it was already dark outside. Lulatina and the girls were probably worried. If he spent this night visiting too, they would be upset again, and then he would be in trouble. The bear approached the exit of the house. Robiola asked with a smile where he was going. Kumakicha scratched his head and awkwardly replied that he did not want to abuse kindness. He continued to say that it was time for him to leave. He apologized for everything. The woman cried out worriedly that no, it was too dangerous to walk in this wilderness so late. Robiola added that it would be better if he stayed with them until the morning and then went home. And also, if he stayed with them, they could have breakfast together. The woman asked him, confused, what he thought about it. Kumakicha said hesitantly that he could stay. Robiola said happily that it was true. She was so happy. Kumakicha thought that he was asking Lulatina for forgiveness. He really felt sorry and ashamed in front of the girls. Polar bears are unable to resist a widow's charms. Morning came and Kumakicha went out into the courtyard of the elf's house. He thought with a smile that he was enjoying life to the fullest. The garden was delightful, like in a fairy tale. The bear looked at the sky and thought that winter was coming, but the weather was not going to change. In this magical place, the temperature never changes, just like a fairy tale. Robiola came up to him with a bucket. She said good morning with a smile. He woke up so early. He could have rested longer. Kumakicha said good morning. The woman passed him, saying that she asked him to wait a little. Breakfast will be ready soon. Kumakicha took the bucket from her hands and said that she should let him help. Robiola looked at him and said admiringly that he was behaving so courageously. Kumakicha replied that he would not be able to eat without taking part in the cooking, at least going for water. The woman smiled and said that then she could accept his offer and ask him to fetch them some water. Kumakicha proudly went to fetch water for breakfast. The bear thought that he couldn't resist Robiola's smile. It was as if an internal heel wouldn't let him refuse her. They went to get water together. Ricotta grabbed the bear by the fur and screamed. Kumakicha said that good morning to her too. He asked her to try not to rush like that again. He was scared. Ricotta said discontentedly that he was not there when she woke up. It was all Kumakicha's fault. Robiola asked angrily that she could come to her. The woman told her that Kumakicha had brought them water at her request. She should not have jumped on him so suddenly. Ricotta ran up to the bear and screamed that her mother was a monster. Ricotta rubbed herself against the bear and happily said that his fur was just adorable. Kumakicha thought uncomfortably that his fur seemed as soft as the best feather beds. He went on to say that this little elf witch was crazy about him. Robiola watched them closely. Kumakicha noticed it, as did Ricotta. The girl mockingly asked if her mother really wanted to feel the touch of this beautiful fur. Rabiola blushed and told her not to talk nonsense. The woman added that under no circumstances would she ever dare to think so. Kumakicha grabbed her hand. Rabiola screamed that she shouldn't do that. She blushed and screamed that she couldn't stand it. She was like Ricotta. She had to feel it herself. Mother and daughter hugged him together. Rabiola said admiringly that it was so nice. Ricotta asked that it was also calming. She could do it all day long. They really liked cuddling with Kumakichi. The bear thought that he had a real oyakodon, and his body was just a hotbed of sin. They walked away from the bear and went home with him to finally have breakfast. The woman put beautiful and delicious dishes on the table. Kumakicha thought that Rabiola's culinary talent was undeniable. Breakfast, like from the best hotel in Japan. The bear thought with fear that if he stayed even a little longer, the girls would definitely be upset. He was overwhelmed by emotions, and he could not resist them. His manhood got the better of him. Robiola called Kumakichi. She asked him what he would like for lunch. The woman clapped her hands and shouted happily that it was true. The pagoda was just lovely. She asked why they didn't go for a walk in the forest together. What wonderful idea! Kumakicha awkwardly asked that he could say something. Robiola asked with a smile what he wanted to say. Kumakicha scratched his head and said that he felt bad saying that after such a tomorrow and for the rest of the courtship, but it's probably time for him to go. The woman said in a sad tone, how could he say that after all she had done for him? Kumakicha thought in shock that she shouldn't talk like she found someone else's underwear after 10 years of marriage. Robiola began to cry and said that she hoped that they could go together as a real family. Kumakicha shouted that she had to stop. She had suggested it so unexpectedly. The bear said excitedly that she should understand him correctly. He was just worried about his family. The woman said that she could send them a magic message saying that he was late. Kumakicha was surprised and asked what she could do. Kumakicha thought that she had somehow convinced him, and he decided to stay. Kumakicha, Robiola, and Ricotta went for a walk. Kumakicha watched the interaction between mother and daughter with a smile. They entered a clearing. Robiola said with a smile that they could walk a little further and then have a picnic. They were walking through the forest and enjoying the beautiful views. The woman smiled and told the bear that he should wait a little while. She would prepare everything for the picnic. Kumakicha replied that of course. Suddenly, they heard the sound of horses' hooves. Bear and Robiola looked in fear at the uninvited guests who had galloped towards them. Ricotta called the bear anxiously. Kumakicha answered that someone had come. Robiola saw the elves bustle and looked at them fearfully. The bear covered Ricotta and Robiola with his body. The unknown man asked if she was Robiola. He assumed she knew who they were and why they were here. The woman said tensely that they were Desire's loyal servants. What stubbornness! The man replied that the weak serve the strong. Such is the law of the steppe. Ricotta hugged her mother and called her. Kumakicha thought excitedly that for some reason he was still being ignored. The bear said loudly that they should stop for a second. Robiola and the stranger. They were just about to have lunch. Why shouldn't they join them? One of the elves shot at him, but the arrow flew past his head. Robiola told Kumakicha that the past that connected them was none of his business. He should not interfere. The man called Kumakicha a big guy and said that he had no idea who he was or why he was involved with her. But if he interfered with them, he would regret it. If he wants to live, then he must go. He added that for an animal like him, the purpose of life is simply to live. Robiola, frightened, told the bear that she was asking him to leave. Kumakicha laughed and asked what the purpose of life was. Kumakicha angrily shouted that it was not up to him to decide why he lived. Robiola shouted that she was asking to stop. Kumakicha rushed at the elves. He shouted at the woman to hide, they would talk later. The elves shot arrows at the bear. Robiola screamed, calling for a whirlwind. The woman stopped the attack on Kumakicha with magic. They fired again, and the woman parried the attack again. Robiola began to breathe heavily. Ricotta cried out in alarm. The elves prepared to shoot. Kumakicha confidently told Ricotta to run away with her mother. The elves fired and hit Kumakicha. Ricotta and Robiola screamed in fear. The bear growled loudly, causing the horses to get scared and run away, abandoning their riders. The elf got up from the ground and ran with a spear at Kumakicha. The bear grabbed him and threw him high into the sky. Kumakichi broke his spear. He thought he could do it. He continued to reason that he still didn't know the whole story, so he would try to do it without casualties. However, their eagerness to fight was worthy of his respect. A group of elves surrounded him and began to attack with balls. Kumakichi thought tensely that they were attacking from two sides. An elf thrust a sword into him, and it immediately split. Kumakichi began to throw the elves away from him. He thought he was asking for forgiveness, but the body of this polar bear is strong enough to resist such a blow. The bear put his hand on the elf's shoulder and squeezed it. The man screamed loudly in pain. Kumakichi sternly told him to take his accomplices and get out of this forest. He left half of them on their feet just for this. The elves grabbed their wounded friends and quickly ran away. Kumakichi made sure that the enemies had fled and turned his attention to Robiola and Ricotta, who were next to him. The bear asked excitedly if they were okay. Robiola tried to say something in fear. Kumakichi interrupted her and asked that it would not be difficult for her to clearly explain to the bear what all this meant. He added that, of course, if she could do it. Robiola looked at him uncertainly, but still answered that she apologized for this. She would tell everything. Robiola said that he was drawn into it, even without having a clue about the previous events. She had difficulty collecting her thoughts. They returned home. Ricotta asked Kumakichi with displeasure that he was going home. The bear said that he had had enough for today, and the girl still needed to come to her senses. The bear looked at the tense Robiola and told her that, if she was in trouble, she could rest assured that this polar bear was always ready to help. Kumakichi walked through the forest until he found a wounded elf sitting under a tree. He told the bear, frightened, not to touch him. He was just an executor. He had already terminated his contract with Mr. Desire. The elf stuttered that he didn't want to die like that. It was terrible to die in the wilderness. Kumakichi thought with disappointment that his own people had abandoned him. It was so terrible. The bear put his paw on his shoulder and told him not to worry. If he answered quickly, he would take him to the nearest village. The elf said hesitantly that if so, then good, he thanked him. Kumakichi thought that he had already been privy to all the twists and turns between Robila and these elves, in a language understandable to a polar bear like him. The bear continued to speculate that Rabiola's family lived in the southern meadow of this forest. It seemed that they were part of a nomadic tribe of steppe elves. He thought it was the older brother of Rabiola's husband, hoping to receive an inheritance. The wedding dogma of the steppe tribe is that after the death of a brother, his widow and all her property pass into the possession of the closest relative of the deceased. Kumakichi thought that Robiola's legacy was necessary for Desire to wage war against humans. Despite the elves' superior strength and resilience, humans are still serious opponents for them. The bear continued to reason that there were those who did not seek war and tried to overthrow the warlike ruler. Despite the attempts of some to maintain peace, their opponents were greater. The steppe elves were divided into two camps. Komaki thought that in the family that had taken in Robiola, there were two brothers with opposing views. Robiola's husband, Nosergui, was a supporter of war, while his older brother, Desire, wanted to become a ruler himself. He continued to reason that whoever gains the upper hand will destroy the home and become the new leader. The elf said that in the end, the one who was thirsty for war died, and Mr. Desire remained, becoming the leader of the clan and took all the property of his brother and Robiola. Kumakichi asked why she refused to become his wife. The elf answered that it was right on target. For Robiola, he was her enemy and her husband's enemy. To settle the guilt before the clan, he personally cut off his brother's head. The man continued to say that Mr. Desire had been patiently waiting for Robiola to decide to return on her own. But his patience had run out and he had ordered them to bring her back by force if necessary. Kumakichi was angered by this story. The elf stood up and asked what he had told. Everything he knew. Now he would get rid of him. The bear shook his head. Kumakichi said no. He wasn't even going to. He keeps his word. He will take him to the village as he promised. The elf said, thanking him for his help. The bear grabbed the boy by the hand. The elf called him a tough guy and asked him if he could ask about something. Kumakichi confidently answered that he could do it. The elf asked with interest how Robiola was, how the girl was. Kumakichi let go of his hand, and the boy fell. The elf screamed in surprise. Why did he do that? He could have gotten hurt. Kumakichi angrily asked that they could go. The bear grabbed the boy by the leg and dragged him to the village. The elf screamed loudly that Kumakicha had decided to punish him like that. At that time, another elf was walking through the forest. The guy angrily shouted, "What did he do to deserve such treatment?" The elf stumbled and fell. He shouted in displeasure. Someone asked if they were finished yet. The elf turned around in horror. There stood a man in a dark cloak, surrounded by elves, whom he now controlled. The guy shouted loudly that he asked to look at everything from the other side. What else could he do? He did not know that this white bear would be with her. The old man leaned over and asked what his last words were. The elf took out a knife and screamed that he would not die in this disgusting wilderness. The old man smiled, and the elf's head was grabbed by a huge hand. The old man said that, "Just don't tell him that he helped to harm him." He continued to say that the desired sample was able to escape, but he was able to get something in return. He should be grateful to him. His body will be the cornerstone of his research. The man who held the elf turned out to be Guillemot, but he was dead. But his body was controlled. Kumakicha walked through the forest and remembered the conversation with the elf. The boy told him that they were just scouts. The main detachment was located in a city nearby. The bear thought that it seemed that Desire was not going to retreat. He has already sent many soldiers, and when he learns about him, he will send even more. No matter how many he sends, he will not lose to him. Kumakicha continued to reason that despite Robiola's request, he would not let her brother-in-law take possession of her again. Everything was so complicated, he was still her relative, although he would not sit idly by and wait for the outcome. The bear remembered Robiola's upset face and thought what would happen if Robiola changed her mind and returned to Desire. Women are natural strategists. Kumakicha thought that he was asking her easily. She should flirt and play a little, but still. If Desai had postponed his search for her for at least a couple of years, then they could have dated. The bear blushed and thought with embarrassment. How could he think of such a stupid thing? He was so stupid. Of course, such a beauty would never hang out with a bear like him. She didn't throw him out only because he saved her daughter. Kumakicha thought with fear that the girls had started to hate him too. He had fallen on them out of the blue. If he was now discussing that he was really annoying them and they didn't want to see him anymore, the bear continued to frustratedly reason why his thoughts were so negative. He shouldn't lose heart. He urgently needed to come home as soon as possible. Kumakicha opened the door and shouted joyfully that he was home. The girls looked at him in surprise. They were already having dinner at that time. Suddenly, they realized that he had finally returned. Kumakicha waited tensely for their actions and words. They ran up to him and hugged him tightly. The girls joyfully shouted that Kumakicha had returned home. They had been waiting for him so much. The bear smiled and said that he was sorry for being back so late. The triplets started licking Kumakicha's fur, but the bear decided not to complain. Lulutina said displeased that he couldn't just disappear without warning them. Kumakicha replied guiltily that he could. He would warn them. The bear thought sadly that he had been so worried about Robiola that he had completely forgotten about Lulutina and her family. The next day came. Kumakicha thought that soon after his return, a heavy autumn rain began. The triplets looked out the window and said that the drops were falling. So mesmerizing, but they couldn't go for a walk. While the girls were busy, the bear tried to approach the door. Suddenly, Lulutina and her sisters appeared behind him. She asked him with a smile where he was going. The bear awkwardly replied that he had physical needs. Lulutina smiled broadly and asked if that was true. The girl called her sister Lilitina. Lilitina approached the bear and said that they could go. Kumakicha and the girl walked through the forest. He thought that he would forever remember yesterday's breakdown. He continued to reason that his older sisters had also begun to constantly follow him. He can't even go to the toilet without permission. He understands that they are showing concern, but he is unlikely to last long. The bear stopped and asked Lily for forgiveness. And then he sat down and asked Lilitina that she could at least turn away. The girl blushed and said with a smile that in no case he cannot worry. He can do his job. Kumakicha thought with displeasure that, as if he could, when she stared like that. They returned home. Everyone was busy with their own affairs while it was raining. Lulutina and Lilitina were embroidering together. Altina was carving a bear figurine out of stone. Kumakicha noticed this and asked what she was doing now. The girl replied that it was Kumakicha. The bear thought that she was as handy as ever. the rain stopped and Kumakicha and Lulatina were walking through the forest. The girl happily said that she hoped the weather would be clearer tomorrow. Kumakicha replied that he did too. Lulatina noticed the flowers and squatted down to smell them. Kumakicha looked at her and remembered Ricotta and Robiola. The bear had been thinking about them all the time. Lulatina came close to him and asked what he was thinking about. Kumakicha shook his head and replied that he was thinking about nothing. The girl screamed that it was enough. Lulatina screamed furiously that Kumakicha was now just pathetic. Of course, she blames herself for being too jealous. But now he's not her beloved Kumakicha. He is different. The girl continued to say that something was really bothering him. It was somehow connected with that little elf Lulatina had spoken about. The bear replied that it was. Lulatina asked that by keeping silent he was trying not to endanger at least them. Kumakicha replied that he was very sorry. He didn't want to hide the fact that right now, the elf and her mother were in danger, and he had no idea how to help them. Lulatina said that she was asking for forgiveness. She was so heated now. Kumakicha asked why she was repenting. The girl answered that she was constantly interfering. Lulatina continued to speak when Kumakicha wanted to be alone. She tried her best to stop him. She was so selfish, thinking only of her feelings. Kumakicha whispered that Lulatina really thought so. The girl said that she was asking for forgiveness for him having to see her like this. They've been through so much together. The bear said that it might only get worse. Lulatina said that if Kumakicha had business, she would have to accept it. He could rely on her. She would be able to protect their home and all its inhabitants. She added that he should do what he thought was right. The next morning, Kumakicha took his things and set off. The bear said that he would never have thought that it was possible to prepare so much tasty and easy-to-eat food. Kumakicha thought that he had gotten too carried away. He needed to look around and find a way. By the way, the bag seemed to feel lighter that she had put it there at all. The bear opened the bag. He shouted in shock that Lalo was there. The girl climbed into his bag and ate his food. The girl laughed sweetly. Kumakicha thought she was following him. Lalo handed him a cookie and asked what he wanted to try. Absolutely delicious. Kumakicha looked at the girl and thought as he opened the food bag. He found Lalo inside. Now he wondered if there was anything left of the provisions. The bear picked her up and asked her why she had climbed in here without permission. Lalo happily replied that she had. Kumakicha hugged her and thought about what to do about it. The bear thought that if Desir, the leader of the elves, really had his sights set on Robiola, he wasn't sure he had much time left to come and help her. Kumakicha wondered whether he should go back and leave Lalo or go with her. Suddenly, he smelled a strange smell. He looked at the forest and thought there were people there. The bear told him to come out, no need to hide. Lalo asked in surprise what was going on. An old man in a cloak appeared with a huge staff. The old man said with a grin that he never expected to meet a deity here. Lalo looked at the uninvited guest with displeasure. She didn't like him very much. Kumakicha said that something told him that he wasn't just out for a walk. The old man smiled and said that the forest dwellers had run out of luck. He went on to say that he had encountered something very unusual. His body would become the basis of his greatest research. People came out of the forest, like dolls that they controlled. Kumakicha looked at them and thought, what a horror. They have no fighting spirit at all. The bear told Lalo to hold on tight. The girl said, okay. The bear shouted angrily that he was speaking for the first and last time. He would not let them take Robiola. Kumakicha asked that this was why they had come to this forest, wasn't it? The old man mumbled thoughtfully. He said that in fact his master has some whims on this matter. However, it is not so important. Kumakicha asked what they would do next. The bear thought he had understood enough to decide how exactly to kill them. The old man shouted to his dolls to attack him. Kumakicha thought with interest that they were unarmed. He noticed the blade and thought no. He immediately killed the first elf who attacked him, so that he would not cause problems. The others also began to hit him, but their weapons broke on the bear's skin. Kumakicha cut off the elf's head and proudly thought that such a tiny weapon had no effect on him. He quickly dealt with the group of elves. He sighed happily that it was all over. Lalo noticed that Kumakicha had managed everything. She smiled and jumped. Kumakicha looked up in surprise as she jumped. The girl landed on the ground and screamed. 100 down. 10,000 down. The bear awkwardly told Lalo that she better come back to reality and not go crazy. The old man laughed hysterically and looked at the polar bear. The old man said that there was not a scratch on him. He wanted his body more and more with every second. Kumakicha said angrily that the man was simply crazy. The old man said that what they were just seeing was only half his weapon, half raw material. Kumakicha said that he hated to commit senseless killings. The bear added that if he promised that they would never return to this forest again, he would let him go. The old man said that he was not going to say anything like that yet. He grinned and told the bear to listen to him carefully. He is the one who inherited the name Fladlin. When he falls, it will be considered a breach of contract and a refusal of the mission. Vladlin continued to say that it would mean a complete refusal of such a wonderful food. Kumakicha asked in surprise that he was suggesting that he place all of this on his tombstone. The old man said that the one named Vladlin could not disappear overnight, but even if so, he had enough money to survive in the floating state called life. Vladlin added that, although it was meaningless, it would be better to let them take off his fur, which they could sell profitably to traders. Suddenly, Kumakicha intercepted the blow. The bear looked at his enemy and shouted in shock that it was Guillemot, so he was still alive. The man looked the same as before, but his will had been stolen. Vladlin laughed and said that he could get some pretty good data. The old man mockingly called Kumakicha a white fluffy thing and asked him not to die too quickly. Lalo stepped aside and screamed angrily that Kumakicha would return alive. The bear looked towards the girl, when suddenly, Guillermo bit him on the neck. A wound appeared on Kumakicha. Kumakicha hit Guillermo and shouted at him to bite. He looked at his wound and clicked his tongue in displeasure. Guillermo ran at the bear. Kumakicha grabbed him by the arms. The bear thought tensely that he was very fast, and besides, he had become much stronger since their last meeting. Lalo screamed in fear for him to be careful. Vladlin said with a smile that it was over. Kumakicha grabbed Guillermo and slammed him to the ground. He thought angrily that no, nothing was over yet, but only now was the end. Lulatina screamed happily. Vladlin looked at his fighter in shock. Kumakicha hit him in the stomach and pierced him through. The bear thought it was all about the movements. Too monotonous for the beast, so he quickly won. Kumakicha looked at Vladlin and said that in the end, only he remained. The bear asked what he would do now. The old man recovered from his shock and smiled. Vladlin said that it was excellent. He didn't expect that he would defeat his beast demon subordinates so easily, but there was one problem. Vladlin said that the most interesting part would only begin now. Here are the fruits of his alchemical labors. The old man raised his staff upward, and Guillemot rose from the ground. Kumakicha asked in surprise that he could still move. He began to watch Guillermo. The bear noticed something strange, and said that no, it was different. Lions appeared from Guillermo's wounds. Kumakicha said that the bites he inflicted at the end were definitely meant to kill him, and also that it was an animal's muzzle on his chest. Vladlin said that he was not the only one. Kumakicha saw dead elves who stood up, and in place of their torn limbs and wounds appeared the muzzles of animals. Kumakicha asked what that meant. They were immortal. Vladlin answered that it was not immortality. This is the result of the soldiers entrusted to them by their wishes being given the great honor of revealing one small secret. Vladlin continued to say that he had no opportunity to evaluate their endurance and performance until he appeared, such a fine warrior. The old man said that he was grateful to him for the data he had received. Kumakicha said that it was some weak logical chain. He was not getting involved and would not get involved in this research. Vladlin told him to look there and think once whether it was worth refusing to cooperate. Kumakicha saw how the snake man caught Lalo. The snake licked Lalo's cheek and said that she wondered what the child's meat tasted like. Kumakicha cried out in alarm. He was about to run up to her when the old man put his staff in his way. Kumakicha saw monsters behind him. Vladlin smiled and asked how he liked his demonic beast soldiers. They control their hunger and obey all his orders without question. They are nice guys. Kumakicha replied that he understood everything. He would listen to him, but let the girl go. Vladlin laughed and said that the white big guy easily realized the greatness of his research. He won't just leave. The bear said angrily that he said they would talk, and he would let the girl go. Vladlin took out a large seed and said that he would give these guys this. The old man continued to say that the seeds of evolution, when his alchemy was mixed with ancient magic, resulted in these. a secret technique that contains the beast's mana. Vladilin said that if he let the beast into his body, it would become 5 times stronger than it was before. The result is obvious. Many years of research paid off. He continued to say that the secret method, which can be called the crown of creation. Vladilin shouted loudly that the local aristocrats do not understand. They call this art street charlatanism. The old man continued shouting that he was even dubbed the heretic of Ramlas. These fools do not realize the essence of everything that is happening, what potential this research has. As soon as they remember, they shudder. Vladilin exhaled and called Kumakich a white big guy. The old man said that in this regard, he was grateful to fate for having encountered him today and for this battle to have happened. Vladilin said that it was impossible to extract data from the warriors of the sissies. This wonderful technique cannot even be presented in the city, so in this secluded forest he can do whatever he wants. Kumakicha told Vladilin that was enough. He just wants to test the strength of his beast demon soldiers they created, while Desire's on the prowl looking for one woman. The bear added that he did not believe in such coincidences. Vladilin said that he would say if he insisted so Desire, the servant of the divine dragon. The old man continued to say that he was a dragon's offspring. The blood of the dragon tribe flowed through him. If he had this gene, his research would have reached a new level. Kumakicha thought that the descendant of the dragon was impudent. Vladilin said that the initial goal was for his beast demonic soldiers to defeat him. The old man said that it would be more reliable if he received practical information about their abilities before the battle. The big white guy shouldn't die too quickly, because then he won't get any information. Vladilin added with a smile that at least he would try. The old man released the monkey demon. Kumakicha grinned and thought that he thought it was a frontal attack. The bear tore off the head and thought that he would regret it. Suddenly, a cock demon jumped out from above. Kumakicha tore his stomach as he flew towards him. Kumakicha dealt with the rest of the demons. The bear thought that no matter how much they resembled monsters, they were still ordinary elves. Kumakicha thought that when it came to fighting, he would win, although of course there was still one opponent left. Guillemot ran at the bear, but Kumakicha dodged. The bear said that Guillemot was here. They began to fight. Lalo was caught by the monster's snake all this time. The girl watched the fight with alarm. The snake asked why she was silent now. She licked her again and said that she had delicious eyes. Lalo pouted and said that she was just stalling for time, and now everything is ready. Lalo slashed at the snake with her claws and hit it in the eye. She broke free from the snake's grip while he screamed in pain that she had damaged his eye. The monster screamed that she was a little girl. She should just let him kill her. Vladilin screamed for her to stop. This was a valuable body for his experiments. If he killed her, she would lose her freshness. The monster wanted to object, but did not. He noticed that Lalo was running away into the forest. Vladilin shouted loudly that she was leaving. He had lost her, but there was nothing he could do about it. The old man loudly called his soldier Guillemot. Vladilin told Guillemot to hurt this child terribly, but not fatally. They could even tear off her limbs. Kumakicha shouted anxiously to Lalo not to worry. The bear wanted to run after Guillemot, but another demon stopped him. Kumakicha dealt with him, but Guillemot had already reached Lalo. Lalo closed her eyes, but no blow followed. The bear ran to the girl. The old man said that his body was not moving. But why was that so? Kumakicha ran to him and pushed him into the bushes. The bear asked worriedly if she was okay. Lalo shouted that yes, she was fine. Guillemot stood up. Kumakicha hit him in the neck and in the head of the lion. The bear wondered what was happening. Unexpectedly, he betrayed his master. Kumakicha continued to reason that he didn't quite understand, but here was his chance. The bear hit Guillemot and the lion on his belly a couple of times. Kumakicha pierced him. Guillemot smiled for the last time. Kumakicha noticed this and said in surprise that Guillemot did it on purpose. Vladilin shouted that he was a fool, so his secret technique didn't work. Kumakicha headed towards the old man. Vladilin shouted at him not to come near him. He and the big white guy could just sit down and talk. Kumakicha said that he had miscalculated. The bear screamed angrily that he had threatened Lalo, so what mercy could there be? Vladilin screamed at the remaining monsters to attack and protect him. Kumakicha quickly dealt with them. Vladilin shouted in shock that they had lost. Then he summoned a barrier. The old man found himself in a cocoon of crystals. Vladilin laughed loudly. Kumakicha broke through his defense and hit him in the face. The old man flew off into the bushes. The bear ran after him but saw no one there, which was strange, since he remembered exactly where Vladlin had flown off to. He came up and saw a cliff. Kumakicha looked down and said that he had disappeared, as expected, from such a height. Lalo approached the bear and hugged him from behind. Kumakicha said that it was scary. He himself is not delighted with it. He asked for forgiveness for it. Lalo cried happily that Kumakicha was so cool. The bear awkwardly said that Lalo was a strong girl. Lalo answered with a smile that, of course. Kumakicha said that it was time for them to move on, otherwise they might not make it. The bear said hesitantly that, although he would like to stay here a little longer. Lalo happily shouted that she agreed. They still had some sweets left. Kumakicha said that this is how it is. They can do it. Robiola was sitting in her house. It was raining outside. She buried her face in her knees and tiredly said why everything was like this. She didn't like everything that was happening. She continued to say that she knew from the beginning that she couldn't escape from this. And yet, she raised her head and said that she thought about Kumakicha. Robiola clasped her hands and said no. She couldn't drag him into this. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Ricotta came in. She called her mother to talk. The woman looked at her worried daughter and smiled and told her to come in. The girl lay down on Robiola's stomach. Ricotta asked sadly that the bad elves would come for them. Robiola said with a smile that she shouldn't be afraid, her mother was with her. The girl asked that they could no longer stay here. Robiola told her not to say that. Ricotta said that she hated the thought of returning to the clan. There were so many scoundrels. Robiola looked at the top of her head and called her. Ricotta looked into her mother's eyes and asked reassuringly that they wouldn't be able to run away again. Robiola smiled slightly and replied that it would be nice to leave. The girl cried out joyfully that they should go to Kumakichi then. Robiola cried out confidently that they couldn't do that. She must never say that again. Ricotta looked at her in surprise. Robiola covered her mouth with her hands and sighed. The woman said, upset, that she was asking for forgiveness for this. She was asking for forgiveness. Ricotta began to cry when she saw tears in her mother's eyes. She said it so that her mommy wouldn't cry. She would never say that again, no matter what. She didn't have to worry. Suddenly, they heard someone knocking on the door. Robiola ran to open the door. She thought that there was a protective barrier around the house. The alarm would sound only if an enemy was approaching. She continued to reason that he had not reacted in any way, which meant that Robiola opened the door and saw a wet Kumakicha. The woman looked at him in surprise. Kumakicha said that he was asking for forgiveness for such a late visit. Polar bears have a hard time finding their way around in such weather. Robiola was so shocked that she didn't even know what to say to him. She asked anxiously what had happened. Ricotta came running and joyfully shouted that Kumakicha had arrived. She hugged him and joyfully shouted that he was here. He put the bag on the floor. Lalo shouted from it that she was stuck. Where were they anyway? And what they should do? The girl managed to get out of Kumakicha's bag. Lalo shook her head and tail to throw off the water. Robiola saw her and screamed in surprise. Ricotta came up to her and asked her what she was doing there. She had to dry herself quickly, otherwise she would catch a cold. Lilo smiled and shouted that she had come to Ricotta. Lalo, the magnificent Lalo, had arrived to her. The girl cried out in displeasure that her name was not Ricta, but Ricotta. Lalo asked with a laugh what she was offended about. Ricotta blushed and shouted that she wasn't offended. She could try to keep quiet for at least a couple of minutes, and in the meantime, she would run for a towel. Ricotta ran away screaming that this was why she didn't like children. God, honestly. Robiola smiled as she watched her daughter worry so much about the guest. The woman picked her up and happily said it was nice to meet Miss Werewolf. She was Robiola. The girl blushed and said Lalo was Lalo. Kumakicha watched them awkwardly. He approached Robiola and Lalo and said that this child lived with him. She was worried about him, so she decided to follow him. Robiola said that she understood. Lalo slapped her on the cheek and called her name. The woman asked why she was slapping her cheeks now. What had happened? Lalo grabbed her cheeks and screamed that everything was fine. They were under Kumakicha's protection, so she begged her not to cry. The woman looked at the child in surprise. Robiola closed her eyes and hugged Lalo tightly. She said that it was okay. She believed her. Ricotta brought a towel and began to carefully dry her friend. Ricotta told her not to twitch now. She was a child and got into trouble because of her selfishness. Lalo cried out in displeasure that she was not a child at all. Kumakicha and Robiola sat down at the table to drink tea. The woman awkwardly said that she had been upset earlier. She was asking for forgiveness. Kumakicha replied that it was okay after all. He was the one who left, practically abandoned them. Kumakicha said that he was sorry. After the battle, he caught a couple of elf soldiers. They told him about the situation. Robiola looked down and said that, so that's how it was. The woman said that it meant he knew everything about her now. Kumakicha replied that yes, he was asking for forgiveness for that. Robiola said he didn't need to apologize. She went on to say it was her mistake. She was asking for forgiveness. She'd had done something wrong without explaining anything. Robiola asked curiously how much he knew. Kumakicha said that, according to clan custom, a man named Desire forced her to remarry. Robiola replied that it was true. It was not something she would happily talk about. The woman added that they, the elves of the steppes, were treated as property. She refused to marry in defiance of tradition. For the first time in history, a woman disobeyed, and the clan does not forgive such a thing. Ricotta worriedly called her mother so that she would not be upset. Kumakicha drank the tea in one gulp and said confidently that it was not her fault. Lalo and Ricotta hugged the woman to support her. The bear said that everything was fine. She didn't need to run away. She wasn't guilty of anything, but he ran away without permission, so. Kumakicha hugged Robiola and Ricotta tightly. He told Robiola that he would protect Ricotta with her, so everything would be fine. Robiola looked at him in surprise, and then began to cry. She fell asleep in his arms. The next day came, and the rain stopped. Kumakicha came out of the house and saw elves on horses approaching the house. The fair-haired boy stood in front of the bear. Kumakicha said that it meant he was Desire. Paran asked where Robiola was. The bear snapped his fingers and angrily replied that he had no idea where Robiola was. The bear continued to say with displeasure that they had made a huge mistake by coming here. How can anyone hide in such a hellish place? Kumakicha said that seriously. The logic of elves constantly living and basking in the rays of the sun in the meadows kills him. Desire asked that he was the same big guy that their squad reported about. The guy asked again where Robiola was. Kumakicha thought with displeasure that he had tried to take him on a dare, but it hadn't worked. He even felt a little offended to some extent. Someone had said that provocations had no effect on their leader. Kumakicha looked at the man and said in surprise that it was Drahomir. He took off his hood and said that they had met the white giant again. Drahomir said with a smile that he had not expected them to meet him like this. The great forest guardian, the polar bear. Kumakicha looked at him intently. Desire asked the man if he knew him. Drahomir replied that they had met when he was developing this forest. They were discussing this polar bear. Kumakicha asked that he asks for forgiveness, but maybe they should chat in another place far away from here. What do they think about this? They can just leave. The bear said discontentedly that they should leave here. He still had sheep to save today. Desire said that they could leave, or they could not. They would stay here. The boy approached Kumakicha on his horse and said that he was asking the polar bear to get out of his way. The bear mockingly asked him that he didn't like that answer. Desire replied that in that case, he had no other choice. The boy jumped off his horse and struck the bear with his sword. He shouted for him to get out of the way immediately. The blow did not cause any damage to the bear. Kumakicha wanted to hit him. That Desire jumped over his head and landed on the fence of the house. He turned out to be very agile. He took out his sword again and decided to attack Kumakicha again. The bear quickly parried his blow. Desire looked at him in shock. It was a very sudden attack. The guy landed on the ground and began to retreat. He was already out of breath from their battle. Drahomir asked the leader if that was his goal. Instead of making a woman fall in love with him, he lost the fight to his own male stubbornness. Desire angrily shouted at him to shut up. He is here to fulfill his direct duties, the duties of the head of the clan, and he has no reason to show off or stroke his ego now. The boy confidently told Drahomir that he was asking for forgiveness, but this time he would disobey him and would not give in, even despite the friendship of their clan since the reign of his father. Kumakicha thought in surprise that he felt a gust. Could it be that the air around him had changed? Was it not magic? A strong wind had risen around Desire. The bear remembered how Robiola used magic in their battle together. Kumakicha asked the head of the elf clan that he himself did not know what to do next. The bear waved his hand at him and confidently said that he could attack him. Come on. Desire looked at him intently, and then suddenly rushed towards Kumakich. The bear grabbed Desire's sword. He threw it aside and grabbed the boy with his big paws. Kumakicha thought that he ran very fast and dexterously. The bear continued to reason that such techniques would not work on him. Despite the erroneous theory that bears are slow, Kumakicha asked that attacking head-on was stupid. He did not find it so. Desire angrily screamed at him to let him go. The bear grabbed the guy by the neck and said angrily that he would not kill him right away. He could not even dream of it. He would suffer. Drahomir hit Kumakit with his sword, and the bear had to let go of Desire. The boy fell and tried to catch his breath after the fight and the capture from Kumakit. He almost lost. Kumakicha ran up and struck Drahomir. The man noticed this and held his sword out in front of him to stop the attack. The man said with a smile that it was so cool. It was one thing to watch from the sidelines, and another to participate. Drahomir went on to say that he expected nothing less from a polar bear whose strength was derived from ancient ancestors. The bear told Drachomir that he was the last of the heirs of the dragon's blood. The man cried out in surprise and asked with interest where he got such knowledge. Kumakicha replied that the alchemist Vladilin had said something like that. Desire got on all fours and shouted that it was that man, the one who had been following them closely, although he wasn't even in their squad. The bear asked in surprise if this was true. He thought awkwardly that maybe they weren't such bad guys. Kumakicha asked if this Vladilin was their friend. Desire breathed heavily and said that he was talking about that heretic. He couldn't move yet. Vladilin clung to them so desperately, and although he was annoying, he tried to treat him as his due. Kumakicha said that it didn't matter to him whether he could move or not. Even if he crawled, he would leave this forest. That's all that is required of him. Drachamir said that Kumakicha should not try to intimidate him. His opponent is he. He is a native of Pax Paratin, the son of Leon Clarak, Drahomir Clarak. Kumakicha took a fighting stance and shouted that he was a resident of Sagami Province, Kumakichi Kumada. Drahomir drew his sword and approached the bear. Now, they looked into each other's eyes. A moment later, they began their battle. Ricotta and Robiola were sitting in the woman's room. The girl called her mother in fear and said that she was very scared. She asked about the sounds of a fight coming from outside earlier. Suddenly, Lalo put her hands on Ricotta's shoulders. She asked discontentedly what she wanted. The girl joyfully shouted that Lalo was with them. She tried very hard to support them. Lalo confidently said that she and Kumakicha would be the ones who would definitely protect them. Suddenly, the door opened and Desire came in, saying that they hadn't seen their dear sister for a long time. Robiola said that Desire had arrived. Desire said happily that they hadn't seen their dear sister for a long time. He had come to pick her up. Robiola looked at the boy closely and said that it was Desire. The boy happily said that 3 years after the uprising, the unrest in the meadows and pastures had completely subsided, and their family members were making a truce. For the sake of returning to a peaceful life, even the elders decided to show their generosity, so they must return home together. Robiola's gaze was filled with deep melancholy. Robiola confidently replied that she was asking for forgiveness, but no, she would not return home with him. Desire screamed in shock. Why? She had to tell him exactly what he could do. Robiola screamed loudly, asking him to calm down right now. The woman hugged Ricotta and said that this was all wrong. Now they just wanted a quiet life in his forest, so he had to understand her. Desire listened carefully to Robiola. The guy said that he was afraid, but it wouldn't work out that way. That was the will of their clan elders. Her opinion didn't count here. He said that she just wanted him to drag her to them by force. Lalo stood in front of Robiola and Ricotta to prevent Desire from approaching them. The guy said discontentedly, "What is she doing now? She should get out of his way." Lalo angrily screamed that Lalo would not move for anything. Desire asked discontentedly, "What does this concern her? She is superfluous here. There is no need to interfere at this time." Lalo ran at him, screaming that he had the nerve to bully Robiola. Desire stepped aside and the girl fell to the floor because of this turn. Ricotta screamed excitedly that Lalo was okay. The girl grabbed Lalo and screamed for her to wake up. She screamed at Desire that he was definitely not all there. Robiola looked at Lala with concern and told Desire to listen to her carefully. She really asked for it. The boy joyfully shouted that his dear sister-in-law had finally agreed to come back. Robiola confidently said that she did not agree. She begs him very much not to threaten them anymore, and never to show up here again. Ricotta watched their conversation with excitement. The woman added that they just wanted to live a quiet life. Desire clicked his tongue in displeasure, and then he grabbed the woman by the shoulders and shouted why she was so stubborn. The guy continued shouting why he even cared about her feelings and experiences. She plans to spend the rest of her life in a barbarian country. Desire said that the barrier around the house seemed thick, but winter here would still be hard to live through. She, who spent her childhood and youth in the fields, would not last long here. Robiola screamed furiously for him to let her go. The boy shouted loudly that no, he would not let her go. He pushed her onto the bed and leaned down to her face to look into her eyes. Desire screamed that he just didn't want her to suffer. If they get married, then he will definitely make her the happiest. Ricotta screamed loudly that no, she asks him to stop. Ricotta approached Desire and asked why her uncle was doing all this. The guy clicked his tongue in displeasure and said that there you go, history repeating itself. Fine, they could stick to their opinions as long as they liked. Lala woke up and ran to Deshira. She pushed him and bit him hard on the arm. The boy shouted angrily for her to stop bothering him. The girl shouted that there was no reason. Lalo called Ricotta for help. She grabbed his other hand and screamed at her uncle to let go. She couldn't let him take her mother away from here. At this time, Kumakicha and Drahamir continued their fight. The man hit him with his sword, and the bear parried the blows with his body. He could not let them take Robiola. Kumakicha threw his hand up and tried to hit him in the head. Drahomir noticed this and dodged. He grabbed his world tighter and began to strike the bear again. Kumakicha stopped his blows with his paws. They moved away from each other and looked into the eyes of their opponents. Each was ready to attack again. Drahomir told Kumahichi that it was a great job. He was really trying hard now, wasn't he? He even managed to slightly cut the edge of the fabric on his clothes. He was impressed. Drahomir smiled and added that it was worth it. Kumakichi replied that he thanked him for these words. The bear thought tensely that this guy was so dangerous. He continued to reason that at this rate, soon he, who only pretends to be a polar bear, will begin to lose human consciousness. The limit will be reached. Kumakicha clenched his paws and thought that these powerful chopping blows, soon the attacks were simply incredible. If his front paws had not fully recovered and strengthened after rehabilitation, he would have been chopped up by Drahomir long ago. He put his front paws on the ground. Drahomir looked at him in surprise. Kumakicha thought furiously that everything would be decided in a quick final duel. Kumakicha stood up on all fours, like a real bear. He looked at his opponent with fury. He seriously thought that the bear mode was seriously turned on. Drahomir looked at Kumakik with a smile and said that he expected a lot from him. He had to show him all his true strength so that he didn't hide anything. Kumakicha smiled back at him and told him to watch how he would fight now. Drahomir said that he really hoped that this time he would at least touch him a little. The man raised his sword above his head and told him to simply crush the obstacle in his way. Kumakicha thought that his only chance was to attack head-on. Drahomir shouted for Kumakicha to come to him. The bear growled loudly and rushed at the man. He was simply furious. He had released a real polar bear. Drahomir looked at the bear carefully, so as not to miss the moment when it would rush at him. Kumakicha jumped and quickly dashed towards the man. Drahomir raised his sword to strike the bear. The man thought about when they first met. He looked up at him. He was with the kids then. Drahomir thought he had knocked the huge boar over with just one blow. He knew how to eat properly. He couldn't do something like that for nothing. The man thought that now in front of him was a mighty polar bear, and his consciousness was hidden very far away, as was the meeting stored in the depths of his memory. Kumakicha kept getting closer and closer. Drahomir thought in shock that he had become faster. The man raised his sword high and struck Kumakicha with the sword. Kumakicha thought angrily that he needed more. He had not yet reached his limit. He had to go forward, only forward, no matter what happened. He had to get closer. Kumakicha crashed into Drahomir's stomach. The man flew a great distance away and his sword remained next to the bear, who looked at him intently. Drahamir lay on the ground and coughed. All his armor had crumbled under the bear's blow. Kumakicha approached him and loomed over him. The man looked at him intently. Drahomir said what you would expect from Kumakicha. He did everything perfectly. Kumakicha told the elves that he was still alive, no need to grieve. He continued to say that, unfortunately, he was not a headhunter. Kumakicha continued to say that if they retreated now, he would pretend that he had never seen them here at all. He said that was great. And now would they like to surrender of their own free will, Mr. Desire? Kumakicha did not notice him anywhere. He asked in surprise where he was. Drahomir stood up and said with a laugh that he had just told the chief all this. She and he fought. He alone and unnoticed entered the house. Kumakicha screamed in shock. The bear hit the man and sent him flying. He screamed angrily that he couldn't say that before. Kumakicha was furious that Desire had gone inside and met Robiola. Kumakicha drove away the elves and ran into the house. He said with displeasure that Desire ran during their duel. It was simply unthinkable. He begs Robiola to be careful.